Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. So, looking forward to this. It is so often, I mean, like every week, somebody in comments of social media somewhere tells me that I need to go read the Bible or that I obviously haven't read the Bible and that's somehow going to change. If I just read the Bible, then I'll believe. That's always been a mystery to me. I mean, almost everybody I know who really believes the Bible has never read it. So,
Well, they read bits. They read there's this thing called Daily Bread where you can get a handout that will give you like 3 approved verses to read and then tell you what you should think about them. And it's usually something very childish and slightly insipidly inspiring with no depth whatsoever. But that's reading the Bible technically, sort of, kind of.
okay, I forget that there's a whole lot of people who also go to church. Most of the religious people I know don't. Strangely, they brag about how Christian they are, but they never crack open the Bible. They never go to church. Any of that. And then the ones that go to church are on their phones or otherwise not paying attention, at least to what's being said. Anyway,
Is it because they hate the gay? Does that make them Christian?
not entirely sure what it is. Anyway, anybody got any opening comments before we jump into 2 Kings 10?
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, this is the chapter where they perform a pagan sacrifice. There is no need for them to perform the sacrifice, story-wise, but they absolutely do, and it's totally fine. So, I actually wanted to write my capstone paper on this, but then I decided against it. But it's a very interesting story. I remember posting about this about a year ago. I posted on Facebook, "Hey, does anyone remember in 2 Kings 10 when they performed this pagan sacrifice?" It's very interesting. I think we actually had it last week or the week before that, where there was a suggestion of other deities actually being real. I forget what week that was, but I remember it was recently.
Plot needs tend to be fairly
I think
flexible
it was
here.
Is it Kamosh?
Yeah, when he sacrificed, when I think
yes, when he sacrificed his son, yeah.
When the wrath of Chemosh descended upon the Israelites.
Okay,
though
yes.
some commentators take it as Yahweh. So
of
course, suit yourself.
Because they sound so similar.
He was jealous. He was jealous of the sacrifice, so he punished them.
This is a fun one.
Yeah, I mean, in this chapter, it's supposed to be part of the subterfuge. He's pretend. We'll get to it, but they're trying to gather all the people and see who should be killed and who shouldn't. And so part of that plan involves pretending to worship the pagan god. So
pretending
to set a trap. Yeah,
they are setting a trap. Yes.
It doesn't say that. And I mean, yes, and also like the character who's doing this is not seen as like a great righteous person. He's doing God's will because God wants, lots of people to be killed. But he's not necessarily like seen as like a great example. So the fact that he, also takes part in the sacrifice to kill people doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good thing. But
so God is willing to overlook idolatry as long as it's in service of his favorite pastime, piles of dead bodies. Good. Glad to know he's consistent in something.
The first and he tells him to his face, like, I'll reward you for what you did up to a certain point.
The first comment of the day, Matt White says, Aaron, where was Tomer's commentary during the Dr. Seuss Cthulhu?
Did I miss something?
Yes, there was story time.
I read this book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, to my
Oh yeah, I've seen it. I think it would be way funnier if you would read the Bible.
Hey, She's a little girl. She does not deserve that.
It's not appropriate for
I
children.
mean, that's what Christians want to, right? So,
I mean, isn't the story of the flood is like really children friendly? No, it's got
You know
animals
what?
in it.
Read the one at the end of Judges. What was that? Judges 19.
Oh,
yeah.
Jephthah.
Yeah,
and
I
his
did
people.
read that at 8 because I had been told my whole life the Bible was a good thing to read.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Don't fucking do
I mean,
that.
I mean, the Book of Jonah is not bad.
Yeah, I was thinking
Jonah's
of Jonah as
fun.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jonah's fun.
Jonah is, or Esther. Esther is fun as well, I think.
I mean, Esther still has a good
A lot
bit
more
of
murder.
yeah.
If you can pretend it's a beauty contest instead of a sex contest she won, then
I
yeah.
mean, I
Yeah.
studied. I learned about Esther when I was in elementary school. So
That explains a lot.
What age? Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, like, you know, if you're religious, you're going to be brought up with the story of Esther, but it's all like, you know, getting into the
Sanitized.
palace was seen as something bad, right? She wasn't trying to get in.
No.
Oh, that's
She- and
only
she-
one of the Megillat, Homer.
She was green.
I know.
Matt White throws in another comment and says, Aaron, 100 years since the Scopes monkey trial. Cool story about that. I knew a director who also happened to be Charles Darwin's great-great-grandson.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he had made a movie with, like a big film with, name actors and everything. And I remember calling him, I don't know, in 2020, 2021, something like that. And I wanted I was talking to him about doing a production of, or a remake of, what is it, Inherit the Wind? But
Hmm.
instead of using, because Inherit the Wind changed a lot of shit.
Hmm.
Scopes monkey trial, and so I thought, what, not change anything, let's go direct from what really happened, and do all of the dialogue right from court transcripts, and so you can have this movie and we can have it out for 2025, the 100-year anniversary. And he says, well, the way Hollywood works, you have to get all of these people to donate money and all of that, and have the way to sell the thing. And he said he didn't think that anybody was going to buy it. So I pitched the idea anyway. Another comment here, super sticker from Tammy B. And
Remember, don't
the
read
image?
the description.
Yes.
Oh,
I just said I can't see the image. 20-year, yep.
An adorable, your number one fox in a suit gif.
As a matter of fact, the director that I was just talking about
Mm-hmm.
was part of that. That was part of Kitzmiller v. Dover. He was interviewed in the documentary. He was also in person in the trial. And I've also met a couple of other people that were in the trial. Kenneth Miller and oh my God, I can't think of her name right now. But one of the other star witnesses. It's funny that I can't think of her name. No, not her. It was her friend. It was I'm getting up right now. The name I'm pulling is an activist from Ireland, and I'm getting the names confused, so I can't put that. It's embarrassing. But anyway, I've met a bunch of people from the trial. And then we have Satan616 says, Aaron, your reading was so cute. Toxic masculinity will not hinder me to say it was cute. Thanks.
Aww. It's nice to see you being a grandpa. It's adorable. But I will say, given the current climate, the necessity for that story to be told, for both of those stories to be brought back into the light is very, very high. And if Hollywood really wants to put on its big boy pants and engage in resistance to the theocratic takeover, that would be a very good way to do it. Yeah, that being said, actually, it's kind of funny because it's very this uniquely American evangelical version of Christianity that doesn't allow for evolution. My parents went to England because my sister lives there. And my dad was shocked that Darwin was buried with full honors in, I believe it's Westminster Abbey.
Yep.
Yeah. And he was
There.
like, he was shocked, and he was like, I wasn't surprised. I wasn't expecting that. I'm like, yeah, Dad, it's fine. Evolution is like not a problem for most forms of Christianity.
Until like 5 years ago, Darwin was on their 10-pound note.
Nice.
By the way, I had a perfect flat, new, crisp 10-pound note with Darwin's picture on it. I had it framed in a larger portrait of Darwin's portrait, and I had that little dollar bill in or the 10-pound note in the corner of it. Somehow the thing fell down, and I had to fix that, but the 10-pound note disappeared. Anybody got a fresh 10-pound note with Darwin's picture, unwrinkled? Send
You
it.
know what? My mom is going to visit my sister in a couple
It's no
months.
longer in circulation. The Darwin note is no longer in circulation.
No longer in circulation. Well, you know what? She can keep an eye out. I'll message my sister. We'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
Yeah, anything before 2018, I think it's like 2000 to 2018. It's quite a long time, but that might have been. I think after that they started getting the plastic notes, and they have someone else on it.
Yeah.
Anyways, who's reading first?
Yes, we should read. Yes.
Ah, yes. The Bible.
Yeah, who wants to read about Jehu's plan against these pagan worshippers?
I would think maybe we should mix it up a bit, and Aaron should read the first chapter, and then
All right.
Lilith can read the next one.
All right.
Now,
So read up to 17.
had 70 sons in Samaria. He is a busy boy.
Don't
So
say that.
Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of the city, to the elders and to the guardians of the sons of Ahab, saying, since your master's sons are with you, and you have at your disposal chariots and horses and a fortified city and weapons, select the son of your master who is the best qualified, set him on his father's throne, and fight for your nation's house, fight for your master's house. But they were utterly terrified and said, look, 2 kings could not withstand him. How can we stand? So the steward of the palace and the governor of the city, along with the elders and the guardians, sent word to Jehu, we are your servants. We will do anything you say. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever you say, or do whatever you think's right. Then he wrote them a second letter, saying, if you are on my side, and you are ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons, and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time. Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the leaders of the city, who were charged with their upbringing. When the letter reached them, they took the king's sons and killed them, 70 persons. Then they put their heads in baskets and sent them to him at Jezreel. When the messengers came and told him, they have brought the heads of the king's sons, he said, lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning. I guess eating brains is better when they're aged. I don't know. Then in the morning, when he went out, he stood and said to all the people, you are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him. But who struck down all these? Know, then, that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord that the Lord spake concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he said through his servant Elijah. So Jehu killed all who were left at the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his leaders, close friends, and priests, until he left him no survivor, because God is love and infinite wisdom and forgiveness and all of that. Then he set out and went to Samaria. On the way, when he was at Beth Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met relatives of King Ahaziah of Judah and says, who are you? They answered, we are kin of Ahaziah. We have come down to visit the royal princes and sons of the queen mother. He said, take them alive. They took them alive and slaughtered them at the pit of Beth Eked, 42 in all. He spared none of them, because family values and God and peace and forgiveness and all that. When he left there, he met Jehonadab, son of Rechab, coming to meet him. He greeted him and said to him, is your heart as true as mine? Is your heart as true to mine as mine is to yours? Jehonadab answered, it is. Jehu said, "If it is, give me your hand." So he gave him his hand. Jehu took him up with him into the chariot. I really thought he was going to chop his hand off. That's what it sounded like.
Mm,
Give me your
I thought
hand,
he was gonna
literally.
stab him.
He said, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord." So he had him ride in his chariot. When he came to Samaria, he killed all who were left to Ahab in Samaria until he had wiped them out, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke to Elijah. Because infinite loving forgiveness, mercy, and all of that.
Yeah. So Jehu here is taking out the families of his enemies. He wants his enemies to have no descendants, making the line of kingship a bit harder to pass down. Um,
But he's
So-
only doing it out of zeal for the Lord, of course, not
Right,
at
of course.
all because succession and fuck you, I'm gonna get mine.
I mean, it
yeah.
does. Yeah, it does seem that he's killing people associated with the royal family as well, and possibly
his
the
friends.
people, and possibly the people who beheaded the princes at the beginning of the chapter. Those ones as well. When he got
there's-
there, he probably killed them as well.
I didn't see any indication that he killed them, but they did kill the princes, presumably with the idea that it would spare their lives. And
Mm.
I mean, let's face it, they said that these were the men charged with their upbringing, meaning that they had raised these kids as almost as if their own. And, maybe some of them were still young, who knows? And they still cut off their heads and sent them in baskets. And like, what in the absolute fuck?
Killed all the friends, killed the women and children, killed not just his relatives, but killed the friends and his cobbler and Cooper and his
Yeah.
hibachi dealer.
It does seem to be about, as you said, in inheritance and the throne, because it doesn't say that they killed like women and stuff, or girls.
Not
It
in
does
this
seem
one.
to imply that it's mostly just the male descendants, because we do get into the next chapter a female survivor who no one seemed to notice.
And the ones that he spares, that he doesn't kill, it does kind of sound like he's gonna chop off his hand there at the end.
Well, I mean,
but
yeah, we don't know
yeah,
who this person is, right?
Yeah,
It's not
so
mentioned.
this Yehonadab, son of Rechab. So in Jeremiah 35, it's it's not a super lengthy chapter, but it's at the very end of it, it says, "Therefore, thus Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, has said, no one belonging to Yonadab, son of Rechab, standing before me, shall be cut off all the days." So that's how that chapter ends. But it's essentially a good chunk of that chapter is about how faithful they are, and in a lot of ways they are compared to Nazarites. So this other group, the Rechabites, I guess, were at this point, seen as a good group, an example of
These would be,
people who
descendants
go
of-
against all those Canaanite worship practices.
Mm.
So that would be what you want,
Are they
considering.
supposed to be the descendants of Rahab, the prostitute in the wall?
From
I
Joshua's time?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
Uh,
rather than
maybe
just being
that's something in
unless
like
it's-
popular
much better.
Talmudic thought,
Yeah.
but
yeah, I
I-
mean, possibly.
they do
We have
tend
this
to
random,
tie
we have this
everybody in.
random family, and yeah.
But even in the promise, notice that none of your descendants that stands before me will be cut off. Meaning what? The ones that happen to be there right then, the ones that continue to worship him and nobody else and do whatever he wants. It's a pretty qualified promise. There are loopholes in that big enough to drive a 8-horse chariot through.
Whoops. So while he does take out his enemies here, there is an explanation as to why this other group seems to have been left completely fine. That they have some kind of standing within within priestly circles. It should be apparent, right? Because if you because this is about the line of kingship, and because he even gets people in, because this is the king of Judah here, and he gets the kind of the leaders in Israel to
you skipping ahead to the next chapter, I think.
No, I'm not. And he gets the leaders. Oh, sorry, the leaders in Samaria. To kind
Jehu
of.
is the Israelite king as well. It's not a Judah.
Oh, was he? Ah, shit.
Yeah. He kills
Okay.
he kills the king of Israel and the king of
Yeah.
Judah, and then the next chapter we're gonna get the next king of Judah and then him also kind of doing similar stuff.
I mean, yeah. Either way, the slaughter of these people, but the keeping of this one group, really strikes me as very, very much propaganda.
Oh yeah, and the prophecy too very much comes with the feel of a retcon that he's going to go in and kill the ruling family and take over and kill all the children that could possibly be squirreled away to claim the rightful throne later. But he's going to say, see, it was all because of this prophecy by Elijah. And I hate to say it, but people's memories work in such a way that you can totally plant a false memory of exist. Oh yeah, I think I heard about that, especially if people had been talking sort of vaguely about Elijah's prophecies. You could absolutely work that in as a retcon without much effort. I hate to say it, but
Oh, that's right, because in the last chapter he usurped the throne, basically.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
But he has to pretend to be righteous. He can't just be usurping the throne willy-nilly. He has to make sure that, but you see, it was all the prophecy, and I had to because God.
Yeah, because the prophecy. But I also kept some of the good worshippers alive.
Yeah.
The real history could have easily have just been Jeroboam and his sons were killed by Hazael from Aram Damascus, and Jehu, second cousin of the king, once removed, whoever becomes the king after him, and then the Yahwist cult after, later, centuries later, kind of retcon this story to be this guy was evil, that's why he died, and this guy was killed him because of
the prophecy.
Yeah.
Why can't God ever prophesy anything nice? I'd like a BLT and a slice of chocolate cake. Why can't that be a prophecy?
If he's the God of infinite mercy and love and wisdom and the creator of all people, and we are all his children and everything, can you imagine just killing all your kids except your favorite one? I mean, this is how God is. If God really existed and the Bible were a true testament to whatever he says, then none of these stories would happen this way. You would have actual wisdom. You would have negotiations and deals, and people would be like, wow, I didn't have a solution to this problem. I was just going to go kill them all. But now you've told me I could do this. That's amazing. Now we can all be happy.
Yeah, and we're going to get in the next chapter. Yeah.
And he doesn't just kill them. He makes them kill each other, which is even more fucked up. Because if there is, and I'm not a pacifist, I recognize there's a time to fight. There are tyrants that, unfortunately, force may be the only way to address them. It's not the best way to deal with things, but there's a time for all things. If God, in his infinite power, just gave someone an aneurysm and then, oh, look, the tyrant's gone. I've already set everything up so someone nice can come in and we can calm everything down. He could do no. He's like, you have to cut the heads off of children. You have to pile them at the gates. You have to stand there and make everybody look. You have to go and slaughter these people and capture them and march them over here to kill them over a pit, because that's not at all like horrifying elements of history. What the fuck?
What about a story
mean-
where the tyrant, as it were, it is forced to see the error of his ways, and redeem himself and repent? Why doesn't that happen?
You guys watch
Manasseh.
the new season of Cobra Kai?
No. Sorry.
No. Okay. Damn. All right.
Does it
It's
have a
related. It's
redemption arc?
related to what it does. I'm not going to
Enemies to
spoil it.
lovers, maybe? No.
But
There's
it's a
one-
very good show.
There's one redemption arc for King of Judah, and that's Manasseh, because he falls between Hezekiah and Josiah. So that leaves him as, of course, he was one of the ones who sacrificed his child, apparently. So he gets a redemption arc, but, not the people who performed mundane worship to Baal.
Yeah, mostly we're getting people who are good and then become a bit more bad as they age, but the other way around doesn't happen that often, it seems.
In fairness, bad just means slightly less pliable to all of God's bloodthirsty commands, because turns out real rule is a little more complicated than stabbing everyone.
I like the way
Anyways, Tomer, how's that commentary?
yeah.
Not
Isaac
going.
Isaac said that we get bad as we age.
Mm,
I said bad, not mad, but
I'm doing
if
what
you
I
want.
can. I'm drinking preservatives.
yeah. Okay, so I'll start on verse 1. There were in Samaria 70 sons of the house of Ahab. The number 70 in the Bible is a typological number, indicating perfection. Thus, Hens-Piazza writes that the number represents, quote, the totality of the descendants targeted, end quote. Cogan notes that the number appears in several stories regarding the assassination of future opposers, such as the murder of the sons of Gideon / Jerubbaal by Avimelech in Judges 9:5, and in Aramean inscriptions.
Yeah.
On that same verse, the officers of Jezreel to the elders, etc. Hebrew Bible reads, to the chieftains of Jezreel, the elders. The note that Jehu sent letters to the officials of Jezreel is odd, since Jehu is already in Jezreel.
Yeah.
Kimchi suggested that after they heard of the rebellion, they went to Samaria to confer there. The Lucianic recension reads, to the leaders of Samaria and to the elders, reading El Sarei Ha'ir instead of El Sarei Yisrael. This reading is favored by Cogan and McKenzie, with the latter stating that the Masoretic text is corrupt. Josephus in Antiquities 9:1-5 does not mention the elders.
Yeah, it makes sense that he would have sent letters to Samaria, because that's where they were.
On verses 2 and 3, Sweeney comments, Jehu's letter follows the typical form known from ancient Israelite letters. It begins with the addressees, and the body of the letter begins with the expression ve'ata, and now. The letter is crafted to test the loyalties and intentions of those Amrite officers and officials who remained in Samaria while the king was away at war. Key officials, including the officer in charge of the royal household, Asher al-Bait, i.e. the chief administrator of the king, the governor of the city of Samaria, Asher al-Ha'il, the elders and those loyal to Jehu respond to him that they will decline his challenge, that they are his servants, and that he should do whatever he thinks is best. On verse 6, Jehu's order is ambiguous. He orders to take the heads, quote-unquote, of the attendants of your master's sons. McKenzie writes that the heads can either be a metaphor for leaders among the king's sons or to their actual heads. Fritz comments, quote, the story underlines Jehu's cunning. The members of Samaria's ruling class decides to submit to Jehu when faced with the choice of either installing a rightful heir to the throne or acknowledging a usurper. Their decision is followed by Jehu's demand to have all of the former king's sons removed, a demand that amounts to the complete extinction of the royal family. The fate of the daughters and mothers is left unmentioned, since it was of little interest in male-dominated Israelite society. Worthwine writes, quote, "The assiduousness and compliance by which the order is executed is clearly indicated. Whoever is in power will find willing executioners who try to save their own lives." End quote.
I believe that. Oh, God. It's just extremely disturbing. Sorry.
Yeah. On verse 9, "You are innocent." In Hebrew, it's tzadikim atem. The phrase is usually taken as either an exoneration, according to Kimchi, Ibn Kaspi, Sweeney, Cogan, and Hens-Piazza, or, as McKenzie writes, quote, "as an appeal for fair judgment that will lay the blame for the prince's deaths on the leaders of Samaria." End quote. He writes that there is no need to choose between these two options, as the statement may be ambivalent, with Jehu's saying that they are both innocent and fair-minded, so as to recognize that he did not kill the princes. He notes two more proposals. One, it is a rhetorical question, are you blameless, thus implicating the people of Jezreel, as we see in JPS. And two, Gray renders, you are loyal to the right, and then understands the me clause as an aside. Whoever killed these know that there shall not fall. He writes, however, that these options are less feasible.
I suppose so.
On verses 10 and 11, Fritz comments, "This redactional edition reports the fulfillment of the threat uttered in 1 Kings 21:24. In addition to the removal of the royal family, however, we are told of the extinction of the entire class of officials of the Amrite dynasty. The change in kingship brings death and destruction to the governing elite bound to the dethroned king by loyalty. With this necessary exchange of officials, Jehu has cunningly established the complete and irreversible changeover, and, in consequence, his own kingship." On verse 12, Beth Eked of the Shepherds. The exact location of this place is unclear. Vogel reads, "the shepherd's cabin," and Targum, "the assembly of the shepherds." Kimchi notes his father Joseph's opinion that it was called so since the shepherds used to shear their sheep there, and during the shearing they would tie them in their legs at the place of binding, Makom ha'akedah. Cogan notes that Eusebius identified it with Beit Akath, 15 miles of Megiddo at the Jezreel Valley, modern Beth Ka'ad, a village lying 5 kilometers east of Jenin. He writes, however, that Beth Ka'ad is not on the way from Jezreel to Samaria. Sweeney notes that some identified it with Kfar Ro'i, located on a hill above the abandoned rail tracks from Afula to Jenin, based on the similarity of the name Ro'i with Hebrew Haroim, shepherds. Fritz, however, writes that this place, as well as Beth Ka'ad, lies away from the roads to Jezreel. And Peshita reads, "He broke down the high places that he found on the way." On verses 13 and 14, Sweeney comments, "The first encounter with the brothers of Achaziah reiterates the prior theme of Achaziah's visit to his brother-in-law at Jezreel, where he was recuperating from his wounds."
Yes, recuperating.
Sorry, I'm tired, sorry. Recuperating from his wounds in 1 Kings 9, 15, and 16. Although it is unlikely that all 42 of Achaziah's brothers would have been born to Athaliah, Jehoram's marriage to the Omrite princess would identify them as members of the house of Achab and therefore subject to Jehu's action. The mention of 42 brothers who are seized and killed by Jehu at Beth Eked suggests affinities with the narrative concerning Elisha's killing of 42 boys while on the road from Jericho to Bethel in 2 Kings 2, 23 through 25.
Yeah. It's the same number.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I need to recuperate, so give me a second.
It's
Yes.
interesting. The stories always contain the synchronicity, but you have to wonder, like, it would be so ridiculous to go around being like, no, I have to kill 70. I only have 69. We have to find someone else for me to kill. It's like,
Keep the funny number.
Yeah.
Okay.
The reason why the Bible mentions 70 so often is because God doesn't like 69.
Oh
Nor
yeah,
68.
that would involve a woman also enjoying herself, and we can't have that.
No, God doesn't like 69 because that's mutual.
Exactly.
Mm.
He can't be
Um,
out here giving to people.
mm.
Audacity.
All right, so I got
Okay.
a couple comments. Tammy B gifted one RN Mara membership and then also gifted 2 more. Thank you very much. And then Chemcott says, can you debunk the claim of the rabbis that the descendants of Ishmael will be a wild beast? The Arabs, the radical Islamists, they say it is a prophecy from God in Genesis 16:12.
So,
I
I mean, that the descendants of Ishmael will be a wild beast is in Genesis. The identification of Ishmael with Arabs is something that developed later on, and
Yeah, I
there's
think
no
maybe
way
Khazali.
to prove that or
Yeah.
disprove it, I guess. I mean, Arab culture, the Arab language is closely related to Hebrew and Canaanite languages, but they've been their own thing for a long, long time.
Yeah, the
Far
translation
before,
that I happen to come up by default says he will be a donkey of a man,
oh yeah,
which
yeah.
I guess means an ass.
Which
His
isn't
hand will be
which isn't
against
really
everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in
I mean,
hostility toward all his brothers.
yeah.
I don't know
mm,
who that might have been referring to when they wrote it.
Yeah.
I
When
mean,
they wrote it, we don't know. Yeah.
I mean, according to the Quran, I mean, Ishmael was the father of the Arabs.
Yeah, but that would have been built on a tradition that was already established by
Yeah,
that
yeah,
point.
that's the point. I mean, it's
Like he
all
got
based
that
on
from
traditions.
Georgia.
We
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
really say
Sorry.
that Ishmael existed. So it's like,
Yeah, it's interesting
just
because Arabs are mentioned in the Bible and they're not
yeah,
related to Ishmael, but then you could
yeah,
say it's a different type of Arab.
yeah,
And at
Arab,
various points in history, they've been very refined and educated and civilized, and
yeah.
at
So
other points
it goes
less so.
against that.
So,
It goes against that prophecy, right?
yeah, you're not really picking a clear side here, and
Yeah,
it
but it's
shows.
traditional both to Judaism and Islam that Ishmael is the ancestor
yes, yes,
of Arabs, and I think specifically Muhammad as well, like direct male line descendant or whatever. But
hmm
they also treat him as a different sort of character. The Bible says he's the unfavored son of a concubine, and that his descendants will be fighting with each other. And I don't know if it's the Quran says that he was the actual one, for example, at the binding,
Mm,
the
yeah,
test, right? It wasn't
they
Isaac; it was
have
actually
they
Ishmael.
have a whole extended version of that. I had
Yeah.
a Muslim trying to convince me that it wasn't a fucked up story by telling me the Muslim extended version, which was in no way less fucked up.
Yeah,
mm,
and the idea of like associating biblical characters, especially like bad characters, with um, later enemies of the Jewish people at certain times. Like, I mean, sometimes it goes the other way, where we have a bad people, the Arameans, but we know that we're
Mm.
related to them because their language is similar. They live next to us. Let's give them a bad background of how they're related to us, and so we have this character, where they come from, with Lot's daughters being the ancestor of the Ammonites
Yeah.
and the what was the other one? The Moabites. And so it does kind of make sense that you could think of Ishmael as being they could associate it with whatever people they chose. The same with Edom, right? So Edom is supposed to be a descendant of
the
Esau,
Romans, and they
and the Edomites
yeah,
were a real, like, we mention it in Judges and stuff, that Edom is a real place in the area. So here we say, oh, the Edomites the idea that Edomites descend from Esau is a thing, and then later on we get that the bad character in the book of Esther. Oh no, he's not from Edom. He's from Amalek, right? And then
Right,
later on, the
because
idea that
the one
Yeah.
person was left alive, and we can't have that.
yeah, and so the idea, yeah, exactly, and then the idea that the Romans come from Edom, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's a tradition that started, and then that kind of ended up being that Edom was the Europe and Christianity, and Ishmael was the Muslims and Arabs, and so that kind of just over time developed into different things. And I mean, there is also the idea of like, the curse of
Ham?
of what's his name?
Cain.
Not the curse of, not Cain, because for some reason Mormons went with Cain having something to do with
Curse
black
of
skin.
Ham?
Yeah, that's it, Ham. Yeah, so Ham, even though his son is Canaan and Egypt, which weren't seen as like anything to do with black skin or anything, but because of the curse of Ham, and he's seen as the ancestor of Cush and Lydia and stuff. So kind of like the whole like African continent is kind of associated with the curse of Ham. So at some point, the curse of Ham was associated with black skin. But I think that's a very late development. I don't know if
really
it's
weird,
a
to be
Jewish thing or a
honest.
Christian thing.
When I look back at that, it was contained in so many things as a subtle nod. I think some of the Jewish sort of additional stuff was taken on by Christians where it could serve their purposes. And even in like The Greatest Adventure, the Hanna-Barbera series, where you had the they go back in time and help Noah with the ark because reasons. The three wives, the Shem and Japheth's wives had like pink and blue with headscarves, and Ham's wife had this like robust, very curly hair and slightly more tan skin. Not enough that you would like consciously notice, but it was very clearly angling just a little bit in retrospect. And I mean, I didn't pick up on it as a kid.
That's not bad in a sense. It's trying to argue that the reason why the descendants of Ham,
but
how do you explain that everyone was white and then black people were descended? The white hairs.
And it wasn't given as a reason or anything. It was just sort of subtly working it into the story that you get that association, because if you know the story, later that he's going to be trouble.
I saw this video from a classroom in Tennessee where they were trying to teach evolution. And I remember this one, and it was a creationist trying to teach the class. So everything about this was just all falling apart. But one of the students actually said these words. He raised his hand and says, how can a black person evolve from a white person? We're different skin.
And the teacher said, I don't know. I saw that too. My God. And black people are the original. We're all the freaking...
No, actually not. Everybody started out as a mid-tone. So the super dark that you get in sub-Saharan Africa and that you get in Tamil, is it Tamil or Sri Lanka?
You're talking about the Tamil.
Those are two different mutations, by the way. In sub-Saharan Africa and in
just saying off topic.
I know.
Okay.
But in order to go from the mid-tone to the super dark, that's one of two different mutations, and then to go to the white, that's a different mutation.
Yeah.
So
the sun people are definitely of like a dark tan. They're not. Yeah.
I think the original people would definitely be like in the middle, but probably a bit darker considering we started in Africa. I mean, not like the hottest.
And another important thing is that when you look at people in Africa, they are not all one color. I mean, it's like all of the diversity that we have in the entire world can be found in various places within Africa. All of it. So I mean, all of the indicative traits that you would associate with whatever you want to call a race in Japan or in Norway or wherever. You can find that. You can find those indications in different groups within the continent of Africa. They are the most diverse. The oldest population is, of course, going to be the most diverse population.
Makes sense. Well, wait. Didn't you know the Lord made the four colors of the white and the black and the yellow and the red, and to put them on the four continents so that they would not be a mixing?
Yes, yes. He made all the different colors of men and put each color on a different continent with the intention that they do not mix. I have read that from so many different sources.
Yeah,
I
and
tell
then
you,
and
I
then
pick
there's
up some weird stuff reading historical books.
and there's I think there's still people alive that think like the multi-regional hypothesis where the four races descended from four different species of ape
No, that's if you
contemporary.
accept it as 4, because a lot of people don't.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That number is all over the place.
yeah, yeah.
Carolus Linnaeus came up with white Europeans, yellow Asians, red Americans, and black Africans. But then he also said that chimpanzees and orangutans were different species of human.
Yeah,
I thought the 4 colors were associated with the 4 humors. They were in a lot of later
I'm going to
writings.
evoke Tomer here and say we're getting off
Europe.
topic.
I think it's
Yeah,
the
exactly.
four. It's the 4 elements, and Europe is the fire nation.
They burn everything down.
No, have you not watched Avatar?
Yes, I have.
You know, the fire nation. Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, my final comment on this section is verse 15 about Yehonadab, son of Rechab. We have no prior knowledge about Yehonadab. Josephus in Antiquities 9:132 wrote that Yonadab was Joab's friend for a long time. Hens-Piazza notes that later tradition ties him to a group of religious loyalists passionate for a return to a more primitive form of Yahweh. She notes that Jeremiah 35:6 identifies a Yonadab of earlier traditions as the father figure of the sect-like Rechabites. Fritz notes that the Rechabites lived a nomadic life characterized by the rejection of any form of agriculture or settlement. He takes the accounts in verses 15 and 16 to be a later addition. Likewise, McKenzie writes that the anecdote in verses 15 and 16 is a post-DH addition, and notes 2 interpretations of Yehonadab's significance in the anecdote. 1. Jehu's revolt was motivated by religious concerns and was not merely a grasp for personal power. And 2. The Rechabites were not a clan, but a guild of wainwrights or chariot builders, according to F.S. Frick. Thus, quote, their aversion to wine was a strategy for guarding the secrets of the craft. Jehu, the charioteer, was interested in Yehonadab because of the latter's access to and repair of chariots, end quote. He writes, however, that the second interpretation, quote, fails to explain why verses 15 and 16 would have been added to this passage. What interest would an editor have in Yehonadab as a wainwright, and why would Jehu invite him to witness his zeal for Yahweh, end quote. He concludes, quote, the addition is more understandable if Yehonadab represents a group of religious conservatives, especially since it depicts Yehonadab as sympathetic with Jehu's revolt for reasons of piety. Hence, whatever the historical origin of the Rechabites, and it is possible that they began as a guild, the reason for the introduction of the leader into this narrative is religious, namely to illustrate Jehu's Yahwistic motive and agenda in anticipation of his pending destruction of Baalism, end quote.
That does make sense. If you're doing a revolt and you have to kill all the potential other claimants to the throne, you do need some allies. But to retcon it as based in piety and give it, gloss that might, lead to a claim for loyalty later makes a lot of sense in any time, frankly. But it could certainly have been a later ploy for the political needs of the time, because religion and politics, they fuck all the time, and every time their babies are abominations that eat everything.
And also, like, where was Elisha during this period? Was he just chilling out in his riverfront property in the east and someone dropped a hammer, let me go and float it up.
He's just watching from the sidelines.
Yeah, like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can continue, Aaron.
Thank you. All right, so then Jehu assembled all the people and said to them, Ahab offered Baal small service, but Jehu will offer much more. Now, therefore, summon to me all the prophets of Baal, his servants and his priests. Let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live. But Jehu was acting with cunning in order to destroy the servants of Baal. Jehu decreed, sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal. So they proclaimed it. Jehu sent word throughout all of Israel. All the servants of Baal came, and there was none left who did not come. They entered the temple of Baal until the temple of Baal was filled from wall to wall. He said to the keeper of the wardrobe, bring out the vestments for all the servants of Baal. So he brought out the vestments for them. Then Jehu entered the temple of Baal with Jehonadab, son of Rechab. He said to the servants of Baal, search and see that there is no servant of the Lord here among you, but only servants of Baal. Why would they say servants of the Lord if they believed it? No, they wouldn't have.
Well, yeah, they're trying to get rid of the people that they don't want to kill, right?
Yeah, but you wouldn't call them servants of the Lord. If they
Well, I
worship
think that's just a
Baal,
translation,
Baal would
no?
be the Lord.
It's the Lord
think that's-
Yahweh specifically. It's
Yeah,
the
I think
name.
it's Yahweh rather than
I mean,
the Lord.
obviously, when it says,
Okay.
and there was none that did not come, this is all propaganda. None of this shit is. If there was an event that really happened, then the way that they're telling it is still wrong.
Of course.
Then they
Propaganda.
proceeded to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now, Jehu had stationed 80 men outside, saying, whoever allows any of those to escape, whom I deliver into your hands, shall forfeit his life. There's motivation. As soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering, Jehu said to his guards and to the officers, come in and kill them. Let none escape. So they put them to the sword. The guards and the officers threw them out, and then into the city of the temple of Baal. They brought out the pillar that was the temple of Baal and burned it. Then they demolished the pillar of Baal and destroyed the temple of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. A latrine?
Yeah. Oh, but I thought the pillars, usually the pole was for Asherah, the feminine. Although
Well,
I
it's
did.
supposed to be like a monument or an altar, and it's just like
Okay, well,
they're
fair
not sure
enough.
exactly how to translate it, I think.
Thus, Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, that he caused Israel to commit. The golden calves that were in Bethel and Dan, the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in carrying out what I consider right and in accordance with all that is in my heart, have dealt with the house of Arab, your sons, the fourth generation, shall sit on the throne of Israel. I want you to point out that that the Lord says, because you have done what I consider right, subjective morality. Okay. But
Yeah.
Jehu was not careful to follow the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam that he caused Israel to commit. You want me to continue, right?
Yes, finish the
Okay.
chapter.
In those days, the Lord began to trim off parts of Israel. Hazael defeated them throughout the territory of Israel. From the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, the Manassites, from Aroer, which is the Wadi Arnon, that is Gilead and Bashan. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu, all that he did in all of his power, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? I don't know. So Jehu slept with his ancestors, and they buried him in Samaria.
Yeah, he
His
gets
son,
it buried.
Jehoaz succeeded him. The time that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years.
So this slaughter, right? This would be, it says it was the servants of Baal. So it's not like they're killing the priests alone. It would be the worshipers.
Worshippers.
Yeah.
And the priests and the altar boys and the guy who sweeps the floor.
The thing is, it seems like he was the one performing the sacrifice, right? Because like he was the one that was getting it together. He was the one that offered the burnt offerings. So it seems like in this context, he was acting as the priest. But this was the destruction of the worshippers of Baal in one place, because since there were, I mean, we have plenty of evidence that Baal worship continued for quite a bit, but when it comes to like the golden calves, those being set up because they were set up in the name of Yahweh, those were seen as those were what was it?
Lawrence says that we have plenty of evidence that Baal worship, continued beyond this, which would imply that the Bible is wrong.
Yeah.
But that's only if you go according to evidence.
No, if it's referencing like all the people, like all the worshippers, it would be wrong. Yeah.
I mean, it could have been. It could have been like a long. It could have been a break. Could have been like, Baal went on hiatus or whatever, and
yeah, we were on a break.
But
he went on sabbatical.
Notice the polemicizing here, right? Because not only does he reference the sins of Jeroboam, but he also says, because you have done well in carrying out what I consider right in accordance with all that was in my heart have dealt with the house of Ahab. So it links Ahab or the house of Ahab and the sins of Jeroboam. And those will come into play later, but these two are like the primary bad guys for the whole story.
Right, so the Israelite kings all come. Like the first one, he was like, let's break away from the temple and have our own temples, and we'll worship Yahweh, but then we'll allow Baal worship, and then it got worse and worse. And then with Ahab and
in all likelihood, the golden calves long preceded the temple in reality. They were in the high places in Israel. Yeah, for El, but they were considered an appropriate place to worship God. And as we've pointed out thousands of times by now, I'm sure, this was a polytheistic region. The retcon is from the Yahwist henotheistic cult that has to make this something that came later and that was corrupt. But all the people then would have recognized it as a completely legitimate and probably original way to worship God at these golden calf statues at the high places where all the other gods had statues. It was fine. You could worship everybody. Though the latrine comment got me because I have to read that book again. Francesca Stavropoulou and The Anatomy of God. When she talked about where, I don't know if it was this or another, but they literally somewhere in one of these high places where the altar of a specific god had been desecrated, they built like a toilet seat, whatever the style was in those days, and put it on top of the altar. I think it was probably too big for a person to use. The idea was our god shits on your god kind of a vibe, which is I don't know if it was a real latrine it supposedly was turned into or like a divine latrine, but it does.
I mean, the Hebrew suggests that it is an actual latrine. It lists the Ketivit in Lamecharaot, which is
right.
Yeah,
it's
a cesspool.
They are in the bit where they talk about all men as those who piss against the wall. So maybe that was part of their job as soldiers. Everybody go and piss on the rubble. Go on.
But
get it out.
There is another reading, right?
Mutzaot.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is more euphemistic, right?
Right. That makes sense. For the text, they didn't want the text to be, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very possible this is just an etiology. There was a latrine in, I mean, like maybe on a high place, which would be a bad place for a latrine, in a city, and they were like, yeah, that's where Baal's temple was.
Yeah.
And this is the story that happened there, you know. I mean, whenever it says like to this day, it kind of implies that the writers were referring to a known place. You know, this place. Why is there a latrine here? Because of this happened. Why does this place have this funny name? Because this story happened here many eons ago. You know.
There's always a story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted to check this. Yeah, I mean, Cogan writes that the scatological image corresponds to the one at the end of the previous chapter in reference to Jezebel and to the anti-dynastic curse against those who piss against the wall.
Oh, okay. I mean, to do with the curse, right? That makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll start on verse 22. The keeper of the wardrobe. Hebrew Bible reads, the one in charge over the wardrobe. Septuagint reads, the house of Mesthaal. What?
Oh,
because it's the original
he
reading.
just transliterated the word for like.
It seems like it. I mean, but I mean, they didn't really succeed because it's Meltacha. So.
Where's your danger noodle?
Was it mitpachat, family?
No, it's Mishkafet.
Mishkafet.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Mestal, yeah. Okay, so Josephus in Antiquities 9136 wrote that Jehu ordered the priest to give vestments to everyone. Rashi and Kara took the wardrobe to refer to chests and boxes in which they wrap and store the ceremonial garments of the Baal worshippers. Fritz writes that the distribution of clothes before the sacrifice makes clear that the sacrifice had to be carried out in special attire. And Peshitta reads treasurer.
Yeah, I wonder if that's to do like, you know, let's do it how it's supposed to be done, or if it actually was part of the plan. Like, let's make sure that everyone is wearing the vestment, so it's easy to identify who to kill and who not to kill, sort of thing. And also the same with the bit about, you know, like if you're a Yahweh worshipper in the crowd, you need to be kicked out because, oh, you know, we're doing this properly. The Yahweh worshippers can't infiltrate into this special event, but it could also be seen as, you know, kick them out so they don't get killed together with everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, of course, you know, him doing the sacrifice himself, because that's what's expected of the king in such an event. It would be suspicious if he didn't get involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Although I don't know why they couldn't kill everyone at the beginning of the service rather than at the end, but maybe, you know,
Because
people come late and stuff.
Because it doesn't work like that.
Maybe you have to like
because
lull
you
them
need
into a false
narrative build up, and also
Yeah.
there's more blood this way, and God
Mhm.
does like him some blood. Anyone ever thought about how horrifying a version of Yahweh's favorite things in song would be? It would not be raindrops and roses and whiskers on kittens.
Yeah.
Okay, on verses 25 through 27, Hens-Piazza comments, finally, having officiated over the sacrifice inside the temple precinct, Jehu now officiates over another sacrifice outside these sanctuary confines. He orders his 80 men assembled outside to destroy the worshippers assembled within, in verse 25. Under the threat of death themselves, they dare not allow anyone escape. The need to cooperate as completely as possible under such circumstances compels these executioners. They not only destroy all the Baalists, but also bring out the pillar of Baal and demolish it. They even destroy the temple itself. The narrator's summary renders the remaining rubble a latrine to this day, indicating both the completeness of the destruction of the site as well as the utter assault to its identity. On verse 30, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the fourth generation. Commentators take this statement to be vaticinium ex eventu, i.e., prophecy after the event, spoken from knowledge of the later course of the history of Israel, according to Fritz. Cogan writes that this prophecy, quote-unquote, explains the longevity of the Jehu dynasty until Zechariah, son of Jeroboam, in 2 Kings 15, 8-12. Sweeney writes that the criticism leveled against Jehu's dynasty is retrospectively applied from the perspective of the Hezekiah and Josianic editions, which sought to justify the downfall of the north and to pave the way from the restoration of Davidic rule over the former northern territories. Thus, quote, the unabashed praise for Jehu's acts and the promise that his house would rule through the fourth generation points to the interests of the Jehu history, end quote. On 32 and 33, McKenzie writes that these verses are mainly DH, except for a couple of glosses. He writes, quote, as a northern king and a faithful Yahwist, he maintained the royal shrines. The implication is that the loss of the Israelite territory to Hazael was a consequence of this shortcoming, end quote. Fritz notes that the subsequent geographical descriptions of the territory, quote, expressly its extension from the river Arnon in the south to Bashan in the north, mentioning once more Gilead, quote-unquote, as the name for the northern part of the area east of the Jordan, end quote. He writes that the redactional edition corrects the geographical description according to the viewpoint and the terminology of the post-exilic period. And Sweeney comments, quote, the regional summary introduces the statements in verses 32 and 33 that Yahweh began to cut off parts of the territory of Israel as punishment for Jehu's actions. This comment is particularly striking in view of the approval for Jehu's actions stated in verses 28 and 30, but they do not account theologically for the historical realities of the late 9th and early 8th centuries BCE, when Israel lost control of the Transjordan. The territory lost includes all of the Israelite Transjordan, including the tribal territories of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben, east of the Jordan and north of the Wadi Arnon, which was the boundary between Israel and Moab. The present narrative points to Hazael of Aram as the party responsible for these reverses. Such a notice indicates that the plot begun in 1 Kings 19, in which Yahweh instructs Elijah to anoint Elisha, Jehu, and Hazael, has not yet come to an end. The literary presentation is supported by inscriptional evidence, such as the Tel Dan inscription, which indicates that the Arameans claimed to have defeated Jehoram and Ahaziah, although it says nothing of Jehu. The Moabite stone indicates that King Mesha of Moab also took part by invading the Transjordanian territory of Israel north of the Wadi Arnon. Historically speaking, the Arameans and Moabites found common cause in their efforts to eject Israel from the Transjordan. Although Jehu's revolt took place when the house of Omi was no longer able to defend Israel, the revolt would have further weakened Israel, forcing Jehu and his grandson Joash to turn to the Assyrians for support, end quote. And finally, now, I only have one Christian, and that is Augustine.
Oh,
he
God.
Writes, yeah. Jehu, who by an impious lie and a sacrilegious sacrifice sought to kill the impious and the sacrilegious, is not a model that Christians should imitate.
Wow.
Wow.
I'm surprised.
Right.
Like kill them, but don't pretend to worship other gods. That's terrible. That's worse.
We finally found something that Augustine wasn't willing to justify. Wow. Just
Good job, Augustine.
Well, I mean, he isn't, like,
No.
as you see, he's praised up to an extent, so like it's kind of like the ends justify the means, but we don't like the way the guy did it. Yes.
yeah, like it's okay, but don't
Uh,
emulate it. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm done. So
Okay. Who's reading the next chapter?
I think Lilith.
Oh, Lilith. Congratulations, Lilith.
I mean,
I would
didn't
be
Isaac say
delighted.
that?
I hope you all
Athalia
can
and
hear me well
Joash?
enough, because I can't move
Yeah.
forward. I'm somehow tied to my chair.
I can't
Yeah.
imagine how that happened. It's a mystery. And now Athalia. Or is that how is that pronounced?
You
Athalia.
did it.
Athalia.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Now, when Athalia, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram and sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be murdered. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom to hide him from Athaliah, so he was not killed. He remained hidden with his nurse at the temple of the Lord for 6 years while Athaliah ruled the land. In the seventh year, Jehodiah sent for the commanders of units of 100, the Karites, and the guards, and had them brought to him at the temple of the Lord. He made a covenant with them and put them under oath at the temple of the Lord. Then he showed them the king's son. He commanded them, saying, "This is what you are to do, you who are in the 3 companies that are going on duty on the Sabbath. 1/3 of you are guarding the royal palace, 1/3 at the Sur gate, and 1/3 at the gate behind the guard, who take turns guarding the temple. And you who are in the other 2 companies that normally go off Sabbath duty are all to guard the temple for the king. Station yourselves around the king, each man with his weapon in his hand. Anyone who approaches your ranks must be put to death. Stay close to the king wherever he goes." This king
So
is
someone approaching to say, "Excuse me, where's the bathroom?"
Yeah. Well, remember this king is a 12-year-old boy. So, yeah, he needs 3 squads of soldiers to protect him. Always a good plan. Now, the commanders of units of 100 did just as Jehodiah the priest ordered. Each one took his men, those who were going on duty on the Sabbath and those who were going off duty, and came to Jehodiah the priest. Then he gave the commanders the spears and the shields that had belonged to King David that were in the temple of the Lord. The guards, each with his weapon in his hand, stationed themselves around the king near the altar and the temple, from the south side to the north side of the temple. Jehodiah brought out the king's son and put the crown on him. He presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him, and the people clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" When Athaliah heard the noise made by the guards and the people, she went to the people at the temple of the Lord. She looked, and there was the king standing by the pillar, as the custom was. The officers and the trumpeters were beside the king, and all of the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her robes and called out, "Treason! Treason!" Jehodiah the priest ordered the commanders of units of 100 who were in charge of the troops, "Bring her out between the ranks and put to the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest said, "She must not be put to death in the temple of the Lord." So they seized her as she reached the place where the horses entered the palace grounds, and there she was put to death. Jehodiah then made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that they would be the Lord's people. He also made a covenant between the king and the people. All the people of the land went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They smashed the altars and idols to pieces and killed Matan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Then Jehodiah the priest posted guards at the temple of the Lord. He took with him the commanders of hundreds, the Karites, the guards, and all the people of the land, and together they brought the king down from the temple of the Lord and went into the palace, entering by way of the gate of the guards. The king then took his place on the royal throne, and all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet, because Athaliah had been slain with the sword at the palace. Joash was 7 years old
Wait.
when
Oh
he
yeah,
began
yeah.
to
I
reign.
forgot. I forgot. No,
Wow.
the Old Testament ends with
Yeah,
It's 12:1 in the
in the
Masoretic
Hebrew,
text, but
yeah.
it's I
Okay.
forgot.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
sorry.
one of those.
It works either way. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
Quite an
I just
interesting takeover.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, this is actually particularly relevant to today because you have here the claim that this woman had killed all of her family members, which were the royal house, which is a little ridiculous on the face of it. And then she ruled apparently unopposed. And yet her, what is it,
Would you oppose her?
grandson?
Yeah, her
She killed
grandson.
her whole family.
Yeah, grandson.
Yeah, well,
Well, yeah, I
I'm
mean,
just she's been murdered, so I'm pretty sure the retcon
yeah.
is pretty easy to work in. So they steal her grandson, raise him in a temple cult of Yahweh alone extremists. Religious extremists raise this poor kid in a cult, wait until he's 7, so at least he's old enough to stand with a crown on his head, and then violently take over everything, install him as, let's face it, a puppet king, because what 7-year-old knows how to rule? He's like, I want pudding for dinner.
Yeah, but actually
All
though,
he cares about.
that would be a great ruling. Everyone gets pudding
Yeah.
for dinner.
I
All
support
hail
pudding
the
for
king.
dinner. I don't support a 7-year-old raised by an insane cult in hiding his entire life being put in charge of a country. And these guys, again, this was the takeover of an insane religious extremist cult that had been plotted for many years, that set people into place in all the positions around the positions of power so they could seize when the moment came. Gee, I wonder where I've heard of such a thing occurring.
I mean, the translation that you read from, it wasn't very nice to Athalia. I feel like the original was a bit more, like, gave her a bit more dignity. Like your one says, they seized her and took her through the horse gate, and still, like in the Hebrew, it seems to more imply that they made way for her, and they like like a and she walked
to death
herself.
with dignity.
Yeah, she
Yeah,
brought through and she died there. Tumat is more. It's more. It's not as aggressive as, like, I don't know.
Well,
And
admittedly,
or something like that.
admittedly, my duct tape Bible is an NIV, which is far from the most accurate.
The NRSVU says, so they laid hands on her and she went through the horse's entrance to the king's house,
because it's
and
literal,
there she was
kinda.
put to death.
Yeah,
Right,
because it's in Hebrew it's vayasimu yadayim, which literally means and they put hands to her, something like that.
I love the comments in the chat. Like, what the fuck is going on now?
Yeah. So essentially, I mean, Lilith explained it pretty perfectly. Where
they're
there
claiming
was,
a bloodless.
so her son has died, Ahaziah. So now she is ruling everything. But then they, what was it? Yehosheba, King Joram's daughter, Ahaziah's sister, took this one kid of
Presumably
hers.
her daughter.
Sorry, what?
Presumably her daughter.
Oh,
or
yeah.
possibly a daughter of a
Athalia's
different
daughter.
wife. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, possibly her daughter or a daughter of one of the say another wife or a concubine.
Right. Yeah.
And then later traditions say that she was actually married to Jehoiada, the high priest.
Yes, in
get introduced
Second
to later on.
Chronicles 22:11, which makes sense for his
Yeah.
inclusion in the story. So because we have here the inclusion of this high priest anointing this child after they all kill his grandmother.
Well, before they killed his grandmother.
Oh, sure, yeah, before. Sorry. But like in the same context, right? They are, it's a big for the Deuteronomistic historian, it would be like her rule being illegitimate, which is what would justify such a thing.
Well, I mean, she is a woman who took over power after her son was killed. So we can't have that.
Right, yeah. I mean, yeah, she's also like she's not Davidic, right? So
I'm sure Peter's already dealt with this, but there was a troll in the comments that needs to be eradicated.
That was number 2 already. He's coming back to suck accounts.
He was literally threatening someone else in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, delightful.
Yeah.
Out.
And thought he would get away with it. I did some context, by the way. Athaliah is also supposed to be the daughter of Ahaz of Israel, so she's from the Israelite royal family, sister of what's his name? Both Ahaziah of Israel and Jehoram of Israel, who was just murdered.
Also, correct me
before.
if I'm wrong. But both she and Ahaziah have a Yahwistic name.
Yeah, they all do.
Yeah.
That's the thing. They all do, and I find that very interesting. Right? We've got, I mean, obviously, I mean, Jehoram. You know, he comes from the.
They're still part of this Yahwistic family, right? Because
right. But
even
on
if you
her
take like the
side
later
of the
interpretation
family,
of the marriage of Jehoiada and Yehoshua, you still have this Yahwistic clan. So it's not the Yahwism, or like their belief isn't the issue, or belief in deities is an issue. It's that she would not be of the Davidic lineage, and let's be honest here, might have to do with the fact that she's a woman too. So
Of course.
but
well, I
either
mean,
way,
yeah, I mean,
the kingship would have to go to the next
she's
person.
ruling in place of Jehoash. Becomes the king automatically.
Yeah.
When his father dies, and she's seized power, and she's killed all of her. I think there's
Relatives,
brother-in-laws that are mentioned in other books as well,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So there would have been an extended family that she would have killed off, and Jehoash is just the only son of Ahaziah to survive.
Yeah. The polemic is that
yeah.
she is not a legitimate ruler.
Yeah. I mean,
I still call bullshit on the whole she killed everyone. Like,
yeah. Right.
And then
If
ruled.
Jehoash the boy king was the heir to the throne, then she would have been in her right to have ruled as regent.
Certainly.
Until he became of age, which would have been like 13. So actually, the fact that the idea that she killed everyone off, maybe there was an older son that would have become king, and she killed him off. But we don't know exactly. Yeah, I do find it interesting that the sons of Ahab have Yahwistic names. He was so bad, but and his daughter, right? Athaliah ends in Yah, Ahaziah ends in Yah, Jehoram begins with Yeho, and then of course we also have Jehu himself and his father's name. Jehu is, I think, sometimes seen as Yah, is who exists or is or whatever, and Yehoshaphat also begins with Yeho.
I think it just shows how dishonest the retcon is, because the idea is, of course, these evil people who are worshiping other gods and not Yahweh. Well, clearly they were worshiping Yahweh. They just weren't doing it, with the single-minded devotion of this crazy cult that put a child on the throne with a violent insurrection and, came up with a story after the fact for why that was really the best thing. I swear, guys.
I wonder if
what's the need for the emphasis on geography when the territorial dispute always involves Yahweh, the God of war and jealousy?
He is a petty ass bitch.
Well, I mean, they want to, instill this idea that they have the rightful ownership to the land.
Yeah, and it's also like an explanation, right? Why did these parts of the land fall to the enemy at this period of time? It's because of, the events that happened. It's
and then Tammy B offers $5. I guess that's Australian. Says, "Fuck, I love this show. Sorry for the French. It's been a while since I had any Norman tongue."
Well, I appreciate your French.
and if you want, call them.
And somebody in the chat asked about this. This is, of course, Jormungandr.
Yes.
Yeah, my reticulated python. I'm going to American Atheist National Convention on around about April 20th, Easter weekend, and it is in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Mm.
I've decided to drive it because my last plane flight was a roller coaster ride, and I was just tired of it. So I'm going to drive this one, and my wife can't go because we have things that we have to do here that we can't trust to somebody else. So she says, "Okay, take your dog with you, so I don't have to deal with him." Okay, so I'm going to drive to Minneapolis with a Great Pyrenees,
That's awesome.
and he's
I
going to
love that for
spend a
you.
week with me in this hotel. So that'll be fun.
Hmm.
Right, trying to wrestle him. And so I thought, well, if I'm driving up there and I'm going to take Falcor with me, why not take him? He'd be much easier relatively to deal with. And so I was going to do that, and then I went and looked up just to make sure. I went and looked up the Minnesota laws. No, I am not taking his ass to Minnesota.
Mm-mm.
They are so weird against snakes up there. He, by law, can only be up there with a permit. It's not legal to own him otherwise. It's not legal to have him or keep him. And they stipulate that if you have a permit somehow, that he would have to remain in a locked container in an escape-proof room. And here I am wanting to take him out into the lobby or onto the outdoor patio and just let him cruise around and meet people.
But that's what you guys always do. You guys and your dog actually get along really well.
Yep.
Okay. Well, they suck. And Jorgmunder should stay where he is safe.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry for that little interjection.
Okay, so I'll start the commentary first on verse 1. Athaliah's motives in killing all who were of royal stock is uncertain. Hens-Piazza notes that some suppose that fidelity to her father Achab's house and the worship of the Baals sets her on a track to end all loyalists to Yahwism, so that she attempts to exterminate everyone associated with the line of David. She writes, however, that, quote, nothing in the text grounds the conjecture that Athaliah was a Baalist, end quote. She suggests that due to the loss of Athaliah's son in battle, together with the savagery of war as conducted by Jehu, quote unquote, Athaliah suffered from, quote, grief-filled insanity. If her son must die, so too must all potential heirs to his throne, end quote. This view is also shared by Josephus in Antiquities 9:14. McKenzie suggested that Athaliah's attempt to murder the Davidic heirs, quote, creates separation between the two royal houses and effectively undoes the bond between them, end quote. Fritz, however, citing Christoph Levin, writes that this piece of information is historically unfounded. The murder of the royal house is clearly Jehu's deed, and the suggestion that Athaliah murdered her own family has very little credibility. Athaliah does, however, take advantage of the situation when she assumes power over Judah. Thus, quote, the succession of a woman to the throne must have seemed so paradoxical to D.H. that he could explain it only by her murdering her own family, end quote. On verse 2, Yehosheva. According to 2 Chronicles 22:11, she was the wife of the priest Jehoiada, a reading attested by Josephus in Antiquities 9:141. Cogan writes that the emphasis of her relation to Ahaziah hints that they were both son and daughter to Athaliah. Hens-Piazza notes that Jehosheba's act is similar to the daring plan of Yochebed, Moses' mother, to protect her child by hiding him. McKenzie writes that Jehosheba's gender is crucial. As a female, she was not one of the royal seed, quote-unquote, under attack. Thus, her life was not in danger from Athaliah, but she risks it to save her nephew. On that same verse, bedroom. In Hebrew, it's Cheder Hamitot, literally the room of the beds. According to 2 Chronicles 22, this room was in the upper room of the temple, a reading attested by most traditionals. Rashi explains that it was called the bedroom, based on Song of Songs 113, between my breasts he lodges, i.e., the Shekhinah rested between the two staves of the ark within the Holy of Holies. Sweeney writes... yeah. Sweeney writes that by placing Yoash and his wet nurse in one of the temple chambers, Yehosheba would be able to keep them from Athaliah's reach, since Athaliah was a foreigner and would be unable to enter the holy temple premises. McKenzie, however, writes that this is doubtful, since Athaliah's name was Yahwistic, and she was born and raised in Israel. Even if she was a foreigner and a Baalist, she could have the temple searched by Judite citizens. Cogan writes that no such bedroom is attested in any description of the temple. He notes Stade's opinion that the bedroom was not the place where Yehosheba hid Yoash, but rather the place where the massacre took place. On verse 4, the Karites, in Hebrew it's Kari. Their exact identity is unclear. Most early translations take them as a military unit. See Vulgate, which reads centurions, Targum warriors, and Peshitta foot soldiers, a reading attested by traditionals. Likewise, Cogan notes that many identify them with mercenaries and sailors, which, according to Greek sources and inscriptions from Egypt and Nubia, served in Egypt during the days of Psamtik I and Psamtik II, in circa 7th century BCE. Bless you. Their origin was in Anatolia, in the region between Lydia and Lycia. The name Kari is attested in Greek as Kares or Karikoi, in the Babylonian and Persian, and in Babylonian and Persian as Kulka or Karsa. Some have equated them with the Kerethites, seen in 2 Samuel 8:18, 15:18, 27, based on the Ketiv reading Kari and Kirei Karti in 2 Samuel 20:23. Hens-Piazza writes that regardless, they were most likely an elite group, perhaps even a cadre of influential mercenaries.
Cadre.
Cadre, sorry.
It's okay.
Is it Kada or Kada? Always.
Let me check
confused about that one.
Merriam-Webster.
Isn't it CADRE or is it
That's cadre.
Yeah.
Cadre.
Cadre? Oh, is that the right word? Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Cadre. Well, interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah, cadre. Okay. So on verses
Cadre
5
is
through
how it's normally said.
yes.
Cadre.
Okay, on verses 5 through 8, Fritz comments, a first scene has Jehoiada give detailed instructions to the guards. The revolutionary plan is laid out in detail. The guards are to split into 3 units and stand at attention at different positions within the palace and at the gates of the temple court. The temple and palace were within the same area, see 1 Kings 6 and 7. The proximity of the buildings is the prerequisite for the build-up, quote-unquote, of the troops, although we cannot locate the 2 gates that lead from the palace area into the forecourt of the temple. The so-called captains of the units of 100 are the officers of the personal guard, later called guards, quote-unquote, who had access to the palace and temple areas. The driving force is Jehoiada, who has planned the coup in detail. The aim is to have forces in place to defend the underage king if necessary, that is, in the case of resistance from the supporters of Athaliah. In the planning stages, it is only the officers of the guard who are informed, as they can safeguard the realization of the plan through the powers of their office. On verse 6, the Sur Gate. This is the only place in the Hebrew Bible where this gate is mentioned. 2 Kings 23:5 reads, the foundation gate, in Hebrew, Besha'ar HaYesod, which Cogan explains as indicating the interchange of Dalet and Reish. Chazal, in Talmud Yerushalmi Eruvin 5:1, taught that this was the eastern gate, and it had 7 names. It is called Sur, desist, since there the impure separate. Based on Lamentations 4:15, deceased, Suru, impure one calls them, i.e., anybody not pure was barred from entering. The Vaticanus and the Lucanic Recension read, the gate of the roads, and Targum, the gate of the protectors, and Peshitta, the foot soldier's house. This reading is favored by McKenzie, who also notes another common emendation, horse gate, in Hebrew, Sha'ar Hasus, which could be equated with the horse's entrance in verse 16. He writes, however, that it is hard to see how this could have led to so much confusion among the witnesses.
Also, I don't think there would be a horse gate on the temple. On the palace, it makes sense, but not on the temple.
Mhm. On that same verse, so shall ye keep the watch of the house that it be not broken down. I'm reading KJV. Hebrew for that it be not broken down is masach. The word is a hapax, and its exact meaning is unclear. Vulgate and the Lusanic Recension read the house of Mesa, and Targum from what is left over, and Peshita from harm. Some traditionals, like Kimchi, Botzeko, and Abravanel, derived the word from the root nun samech chet, to tear away or to distract, i.e., quote, guard it very diligently that you do not take your mind off it, end quote, according to Rashi. The word is absent from Vaticanus, which leads several commentators like Cogan, McKenzie, and BDB Dictionary to suggest deleting the word as a copyist's error. Others, however, preserve the word, suggesting either the temple for stragglers, according to Sweeney, or alternating, according to Hallott. On verse 10, the spears and shields that had belonged to King David. Hebrew for shield is shlatim. The exact meaning of this word is unclear. Targum reads shield, a reading favored by Kimchi, Ibn Janach, cited by Botzeko, Sweeney, and Fritz. Septuagint reads the thirds, and Vulgate the arms, and Peshita quivers. Cogan notes Yadin's opinion that the shelet was either similar to a throwing spear or was a general term for weapons. In the Qumran Aramaic translation of Job 39:23, shelet appears as the translation to ashpa, which means quiver. Likewise, the Akkadian shaltu refers to quivers or bow cases. Sweeney writes that 200-year-old weapons from King David's time, quote, might not be the ideal choice, end quote. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's very much
It might be.
fits into the narrative element as opposed to the realist element, because, of course, a sword of great lineage and nobility, Narsil, Andoril forged from the shards of Narsil, born by Isildur, son of... this kind of thing. It hypes up the story. In reality, unless you have taken very damn good care of that blade, it is not going to be better. And, also it would depend on who was building it, and, there are certain ways to do that will last a long time, again, with proper care. But yeah, this is all about the narrative. This is all about, behold the return to David's line.
I think there is a mention though of
weapons and
we did have a mention of Solomon. I think it was Solomon. He had these golden shields and stuff, and then they were stolen by the Philistines,
or they had to pay them in
Egyptians.
tribute, so they replaced them
Yeah,
with
yeah,
brass.
oh yeah, and then they remade them, but in copper. So maybe it's talking about those ceremonial shields and the House of David's and not
I thought those were for show. They did not seem to be for war, because you would not take a gold shield to war. It would be one, way too fucking heavy, and two, way too fucking soft to be in any way useful. At most, the king might put a little filigree around to be all like, look at me, I'm so fancy.
Exactly. Yes, I mean, so I think if they were kept in the temple grounds or whatever, they would have been something ceremonial, probably only the king's guard would have it. So maybe they took them out for the people standing next to this new king to be here are these shields, and to show that they're from their descendants.
David did, obviously David was before the temple, at least in the narrative, but he did, when he went to the tabernacle, take the sword of Goliath that they had there, and that's what got all the priests killed, because they, mindlessly helped him, the idiots, thinking he had the favor of Saul, who was a raging asshole. But so there is some precedent for there being swords or some weapons that might have had great stories attached to them being kept in the sacred place, kind of like a museum, though probably not as... But we keep the sacred spear that slew the great so-and-so in the temple in memory of the valor of such and such a hero. It's very much a thing. You're not going to have a
And-
ton of those, but you might have some, and it would be enough for showmanship here.
Right, and it's there are things where like the king might give you as a present a gift to you, a weapon. You're not going to use that weapon in battle, but the spear that was given to your ancestor by the king, you would keep it in like in a holy place or whatever.
I don't know. I can think of a few times a spear would be mighty handy.
Well, nobody's saying you couldn't defend yourself with your ancestor's spear if you were in a corner, but you wouldn't bring it to your ordinary dog fight.
Right. But if you're doing like a secret coronation, you might get everyone to come out with their, dress up and show
Fancy.
Yeah.
And that definitely pulls on the public imagination and gives the idea of the destiny and the return to the heritage and rightful line, the return of the kings of old as prophesied, and yada, yada, yada. You are armed in the event of a violent uprising, but the psychological element is far more powerful.
I'll continue with the comment. Sweeney writes, however, that the reference to David indicates their function, i.e., they are the arms of the palace or temple guard rather than relics. McKenzie, however, notes that their composition of gold makes them impractical as weapons and are ceremonial in function. He writes, quote, "They are important symbols of the continuity of the Davidic house and serve as legitimation for the king in the Davidic line who is about to be installed," end quote.
I mean, does it say that they're gold in our chapter?
I don't.
It doesn't mention. It says weapons.
It
of
says
David.
hundreds of spears and possibly quivers or
Do you think
shields.
they could have kept some of the, because David's mighty men, there was the mythos about David's mighty men. Do you think they could have kept some of their weapons and is a kind of a, I mean, it would be like Robin Hood's merry men and their bows and quivers and
Yeah,
stuff.
something to do with the legacy of the House of David. Yeah.
They're trying to make it very Tolkien, and it's just very creepy.
Oh, I think it's referring to 2 Samuel 8:7, which with the bow
Where it
cases
says they're
were
gold.
taken by David from Hadadezer, and these are of gold.
Oh.
And so over there as well, like sometimes you translate them as shields, sometimes as
Yeah.
quiver. Okay.
Okay, on verse 12, the crown, a copy of the covenant. Hebrew Bible reads, the crown Nezer, and the testimony Edut. What did you say?
Yeah, I was thinking of a different word, nets, which is...
Yeah, it's Nezer, yeah. The word Nezer is attested in other biblical passages to describe the headwear worn by the high priest, as we see in Exodus 29:6, 39:30, and Leviticus 8:9, as well as the diadem worn by royalty, 2 Samuel 1:10, Psalms 89:40, Zechariah 9:16. This meaning is attested in Vulgate, diadem, and Targum, crown. Septuagint has Nezer. Kara takes the Nezer here to be the diadem that David took from Rabbah of the Ammonites, 2 Samuel 12:30. The word for testimony, edut, is more difficult. Most traditionals understood the testimony to be the Torah. Based on Deuteronomy 17:19, let it, i.e. a copy of the Torah, remain with him, i.e. the king, and let him read in it all of his life, end quote. Rav, in Talmud Avodah Zarah 44a, said that the Nezer is a testimony for the progeny of the house of David that anyone who is fit for kingship, the crown fits him properly, and anyone who is unfit for kingship, the crown does not fit him. Likewise, Sweeney takes the Edut to be, quote, a tangible expression of Yahweh's commandments, frequently identified with the Ten Commandments, placed in the Ark of the Covenant, Exodus 25:22, 43, and Numbers 4:5, or Yahweh's laws in general, Psalms 19:8, 119:88, and 122:4, end quote. Hens-Piazza writes that it was, quote, likely some chartered document that rehearsed the character of the Davidic covenant and the king's responsibility therein, end quote. Some commentators, however, take the edut to be a type of bracelet. Ibn Janach and Ibn Bal'am, cited by Botseko, and Kimchi render jewelry based on Ezekiel 23:40 and dodge your finery. Cogan writes that since the verse tells that Jehoiada placed upon him, Vayeten alav, the crown and the testimony, quote unquote, then it is more fitting that the testimony is a type of royal insignia, much like the crown. McKenzie writes, quote, "It is difficult to imagine something as extensive as the priestly or Deuteronomic law being placed upon the king and worn as a regular part of his regalia." End quote. He follows Wellhausen's emendation, Hatzeadot, bracelets or armbands, as seen in 2 Samuel 1:10, and takes the reading Ha'edut to be a scribal error. And Peshitta reads, "the crown of testimony."
I could have seen them giving him a symbolic scroll, to or something similar to symbolize that he is required. He's coming forward to bring back the law, which of course there's a whole extended edition of how that comes about later. But yeah, I wouldn't. The whole thing would be a bit much to carry around on Coronation Day, especially for a frickin' 7-year-old. Anyway. Not a fan of child kings.
Okay.
Yeah. On verse 14, the king standing by the pillar as the custom was. McKenzie comments, "The word amud refers elsewhere to a pillar or a column in the tabernacle, as we see in Exodus 27:10, 11, and 17, 36, 38, and Numbers 3:37. In Solomon's temple, as we see in 1 Kings 7, verses 2, 3, 6, 15, and 16. In Dagon's temple, Judges 16, 25, 26, and 29. In a Persian palace, Esther 1:6, in a metaphoric description of a body in Song of Songs 5:15, in descriptions of columns of cloud or smoke in Exodus 13, 21 and 22, 14, 24, Numbers 14, 14, etc., and as columns on which the earth or heavens stand, Job 26:11 and Psalm 75:4. The preposition al is well attested in the sense of beside or next to. Hence, the king stands next to a specific column in the temple rather than on a stage or dais. Since the king's location is according to custom, Kamishpat, also 23:3, the column is probably one of the two in the center of the temple, whose names form a sentence. Yahweh establishes Yachin with strength, Boaz. In taking a stand near one of these columns, the king lays claim to the promise of Yahweh's support that they represent, and to the continuity of the Judite monarchy and perhaps the Davidic line.
And if anyone wants to know more about those pillars, I got a good video on that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the word amud is also used to this day to refer to the place where the person who leads prayers in a synagogue stands. So it could be like, you could read it as what would you call it? Like when you speak in front of a crowd, what's it called? The thing? Yeah, pulpit,
Lectern.
maybe.
Pulpit would be for a pastor, lectern would be for a lecturer, but either way, it's pretty much the same.
But both of those face the crowd as opposed to the amud in a synagogue which faces east, with the back, with the person standing there will be back to the crowd. Although actually in like Sephardi, they will actually stand in the middle rather than at the eastern wall.
Matt White says, Aaron, this split in the nation under Yahweh is the foundation of those who hold Trump as an anointed prophet.
Oh, those people are crazy. They've started praying to him.
I'm not even a surprise.
They had a golden statue idol of him, like, how many years ago?
Yeah.
I think it was in like 2016.
Yep.
There's also the weird decals where they take all the scriptures that the Christians apply to Jesus, for unto us a son is born and the government will be upon his shoulders, and stick it next to a picture of Trump. And it's like, what? But then I also think the Christians stole that from Josiah here. A lot of those verses, not all of them. And it's kind of ironic. It also makes me wonder if Jesus was in fact a nice guy, because you listen to Trump's cultists about him, nothing they say has any relationship to reality. It doesn't seem like worshipers are the best source for a person's character.
They have a new statue for Trump now, isn't it? A goat made out of dollar bills with Trump on it. It's in Mar-a-Lago.
Jesus Christ.
A goat?
Yes,
A goat.
I think it was a
Seems
goat
bit... Wouldn't it be a
with
donkey?
fake dollar bills
No,
because that's entirely legal.
Oh.
I mean, if you're using prop dollar bills in a statue, I don't suppose that's a problem. You're not trying to pay for anything with it, but it sounds like an accurate representation of him.
Okay, on that same verse, the people of the land. Some commentators suggested that the people of the land, Am Haaretz, refers to a specific group of people. Cogan, for example, writes that the Am Haaretz refers to a social group in Judah who was active during political crisis which affected the Davidic dynasty. Thus, when King Ammon was murdered, the Am Haaretz ascended Josiah to the throne, 21, 23, and 24, and also operated after Josiah's death in 2330. He takes Am Haaretz to be an elite group of Judah, mentioned with other high-status groups, such as the kings, chieftains, and priests, see Jeremiah 1:18, 34:19, and 37:2, with Ezekiel criticizing them for their behavior in 22:29. McKenzie, however, takes the people of the land to be, quote, a popular assembly in accord with their designation elsewhere in the chapter as the people, end quote. He further writes, quote, textual criticism is crucial in two respects. First, following the Lusanic recension, the people of the land do not appear in verse 14, but only all the people. More important, the Lusanic plus in verse 11, which is probably original, includes the people of the land. The mention is important not only because it is the first reference to them in this context, but also because it states that Jehoiada assembled them for participation in what follows. This means that they do not appear out of nowhere in the narrative, and that the subsequent mentions of them as participants are fitting. The mention of the people of the land in verse 11 thus signals the overall unity of the narrative and shows them playing a significant role in the process, rather than being brought in secondarily from a separate source. End quote. And finally, 17 through 20, Sweeney comments, Jehoiada's initiative in concluding a covenant reestablishes the rule of the Davidic dynasty. By emphasizing the role of the people in the relationship, this enactment of the covenant reinvigorates the role of the people in the state, which had eroded from the time of Solomon. Whereas David was chosen as king by the people of Judah in 2 Samuel 2:4, and the elders of Israel who represented the tribes of Israel in 2 Samuel 5:1-5, Solomon was chosen to be king of David, acting at the instigation of Bathsheba and Nathan in 1 Kings 1. Although the people of the northern tribes retained the power to choose their own king in 1 Kings 12:1-24, no such role is evident for the people of Judah from the time of Rehoboam. By including the people of the land in verse 18, Jehoiada makes a bid to ensure that a palace coup like that of Athaliah would not happen again. His bid is not entirely successful, as the assassination of Joash in 2 Kings 12:20 and 21, Amaziah in 14:18-20, and Ammon in 21:23 indicate. The people of the land play an instrumental role in seeing to the continuity of the house of David, insofar as they take action to place Azariah ben Amaziah in 14:21, Josiah ben Ammon in 21:24, and Jehoahaz ben Josiah in 23:30. On the throne in place of their murdered fathers. The restoration of the Davidic house entails the recognition of Yahweh as God of Judah.
I love your invisible dinosaur. Sorry to interrupt. He's just so cute.
He's
You're
in the choir
muted,
invisible.
Yeah.
Probably because he was talking to you. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just asking if anybody had ever seen a ghost.
We all have now. Hello, my pretty. Are you a pretty little parrot?
Yeah, maybe I'll take him to Minneapolis. Okay, Ronaldo Martinez offers $1.99 and says, Jesus a nice guy? Read Luke 19:27.
Oh God, which one is that? I'm already aware of all the times he was a distinctly
Well,
not nice guy.
That's
But-
part of a parable, and that
Oh, is that
the
slay all my
parable of the
enemies
10
before me?
minas.
Yeah, but it's also the person speaking that is the landowner who's playing God. So
Well, yeah, he says, yeah, but those, yeah, he's the landowner who's playing God. Yeah, here, and from verse, this is like the landowner, the king, I guess. He replied, I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given, but as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me.
it is a parable. It's a representation of God in the parable that says that, though, which honestly, not terribly surprising. Reading the Old Testament right now, that's kind of what you expect him to say. But yeah, it's Jesus. Jesus is occasionally nice, sometimes, not
There's
always.
also the time that the thing is, when he gets the donkey, right, he essentially just tells his disciples to go steal it. So
There's the sexism and the racism for the woman from Tyre who wants her daughter healed. There's some nice moments in Jesus. I'm not
the
saying
Canaanite woman that he calls a dog.
Yeah, the groveling and he has good moments. He also has very fucked up moments. They're not.
Those Sumerians are not sending us their best. They're sending rapists.
Oh no.
And others, I assume, are good people.
Yeah. Well, that is who they elected, as the Mexican president was so kind to point out. We thought that was what you wanted, given the election results. But I'm just wondering how many refugees we're going to end up with this Trump term. Canada took in a huge number of refugees the last Trump term, just to be clear. We had tons of people who were seeking refugee status in the United States and went, that's not going to work, and came across the border. We had massive centers set up just to give them beds. It's a huge thing.
Dara O'Kane says Aaron Ra is right when he said that God is like an adult Andrew Fremont from Twilight Zone. Everything he does is good because he is good.
That's a good thing you did, Andrew.
Yeah. Much the same thing when you own all of social media and most of public media. Then every bad thing you do comes out good too.
I only have one ancient question, and that is Ishodad, who wrote that Athaliah's scheme against the house of David resembles that of the devil against humankind.
Of course. How?
He writes that the scheme, so Athaliah exterminated all the royal children. In fact, after her son had been killed by Jehu, she had conceived an extremely perfidious and vicious scheme, saying to herself with anger, and then he quotes from the passage, that scheme resembled the treachery that Satan plotted at the beginning against the chief of our race. However, her scheme was not accomplished, but after 7 years the kingdom returned to the family of David, thanks to a righteous man, Jehoiada, etc.
Oh my
I don't
God.
mind it being vicious, but does it have to be perfidious?
Also, because she's a woman, she has to what was the verb he used to hatch a plan? Well, I guess hatch is also.
She conceived.
Yeah, she conceived of an evil plot.
That might be
I
just
guess
a translation thing.
Yeah.
Probably.
Although when a woman does it, of course, it's scheming, and when a man does it, it's strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
Chapter 12?
Yes, please.
All right. I guess I can read this
Should it
one.
be me again?
I was going to read it, but okay.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash began to reign. He reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. Jehoash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all his days because the priest Jehoiada instructed him. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. The people continued to sacrifice and make offerings on the high places. Jehoash said to the priests, all the silver offered as sacred donations that is brought into the house of the Lord, the census tax, personal redemption payments, and silver from voluntary offerings brought into the house of the Lord. Let the priests receive from each of the donors, and let them repair the house wherever any need of repairs is discovered. But by the 23rd year of King Jehoash, the priests had made no repairs on the house. Therefore, King Jehoash summoned the priest Jehoiada with the other priests and said to them, wait, so this is after 23 years? They didn't do anything with that fucking money? Jesus Christ, okay.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, that's so funny.
20. No, it's from the 7th to the 23rd.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Still, that's a long-ass time.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so he's summoning his the priest Jehoiada with the other priests and said to them, why are you not repairing the house? Now, therefore, do not accept any more silver from your donors, but hand it over for the repair of the house. So the priests agreed that they would neither accept more silver from the people nor repair the house. Then the priest Jehoiada took a chest, made a hole in its lid, and set it beside the altar on the right side as one entered the house of the Lord. The priests who guarded the threshold put in it all the silver that was brought into the house of the Lord. Whenever they saw that there was a great deal of silver in the chest, the king's secretary and the high priest went up, cast the silver that was found in the house of the Lord into ingots, and counted it. They gave the silver that was weighed out into the hands of the workers who had the oversight of the house of the Lord. Then they paid it out to the carpenters and the builders who worked on the house of the Lord, to the masons and to the stonecutters, as well as to buy timber and quarried stone for making repairs on the house of the Lord, as well as for any outlay for repairs of the house. But for the house of the Lord, no basins of silver, snuffers, bowls, trumpets, or any vessels of gold or silver were made from the silver that was brought into the house of the Lord, for that was given to the workers who were repairing the house of the Lord with it. They did not ask in accounting from those whose hand they delivered the silver to pay out the workers, for they dealt honestly. The silver from the guilt offerings and the silver from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of the Lord. It belonged to the priests. Did you want me to keep reading?
Yeah, finish the chapter. Yeah.
All right. At that time, King Hazael of Aram went up, fought against Gath, and took it. But when Hazael set his face to go up against Jerusalem, King Jehoash of Judah took all the votive gifts of Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, his ancestors, the kings of Judah, and dedicated, as well as his own votive offerings, all the gold that was found in the treasuries of the house of the Lord and of the king's house, and sent those to King Hazael of Aram. Then Hazael withdrew from Jerusalem. Now the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? His servants arose, devised a conspiracy, and killed Joash in the house of Milo, on the way that goes down to Selah. It was Yozakar, son of Shimeath, and Jehosabad, son of Shomer, his servants, who struck him down, so that he died. He was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. Then his son Amaziah succeeded him. Interesting chapter. So that's a very, very funny story. They were taking all this money, didn't actually use it to rebuild the temple, and then they started taking money to a place where Jehoiada has more control over it. And
So
then
are you telling me that the cult that kidnapped a child, raised him as their prodigy, and then installed him as a boy puppet king misappropriated funds intended for actual use and just kept it for themselves like a bunch of greedy fucking bastards?
that's exactly what happened. So
Oh my gosh!
this is a very because they are rebuilding the temple, right? But this is a very pro temple, but kind of like an anti priesthood text. At least this specific line of priests
I need pearls to clutch.
is condemned in a way. They don't have as much control anymore. They do still have control over some of the religious offerings, but not of the. I mean, it's hard to separate secular and religious in these contexts, but some of the more secular offerings, because they still do the sin offerings and the guilt offerings. They still keep it for that, keep it for themselves, because they still need to live and stuff. But yeah, I guess all that money kind of went to waste because he gave away a whole bunch of shit to Hazael because he was, he felt threatened.
Which was, I mean, let's face it, that suing for peace then was largely just kind of the way the Roman Empire did near the end of it, which was like, I will just pay you so much money to fuck off.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Gold,
why waste?
have more gold. Please go away. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I mean, we've given you the gold. Like, why waste your effort and people dying and stuff to come into the city? We've already given you the gold. You don't even have. There's nothing left, pretty much.
Yeah.
Unless you don't trust them, but yeah.
At least give them enough to make it not worth their while to come in.
Yeah.
And although if he actually gave all, because I wouldn't expect most kings to give actually all. I'd expect them to say, this is all the gold I have, but not really, People lie.
I wonder if this whole story about the temple and the priests and stuff, it does seem strange, and like, I wonder if it, if there's some sort of, this is an explanation for something. We have this system where there's a chest, a big charity box or whatever in the temple, and that's where we put the silver that come from these offerings. These offerings you get to keep, and it's like, oh, why is this the system? Oh, well, at some point, the boy king decided that the priests would do it themselves out of their own like free will. Like, oh yeah, you just get an income, and then you have to spend your own income on repairs and stuff. And then after a certain amount of time, the repairs weren't done in a good way, so they resort to using this system or whatever. And it's like,
it's an interesting origin story for like the donation box with the slit in the lid that you drop the money in.
Like, yeah, I mean, it is strange, as you said, about like, it seems to be like anti the priest. Like, they had they before this, right? They were already doing it somehow. They were collecting funds in a centralized way.
They were collecting funds, and it was agreed that that they were going to use at least, these portions of the funds. You keep this one, but the one for guilt goes into this pile that goes to rebuilding the temple.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's also like anti the king. I mean, in a sense, it's like he made this unwise decision. But then again, it's like he was like, as you say, like 7 years old, and the priests kind of influenced him. So,
it took him till he was 30 to grow a spine, but he did. And he was the one who actually got the temple put back together because he frickin'
in the story,
told them to stop being greedy little bastards and actually attend to their duties.
Okay, so before I'll start, I should start with the verse with 21 for the previous chapter, which is 12:1 in the Masoretic text, because the discrepancy is odd. So I'll start with that. So Sweeney comments, Jehoash's introductory regional account is unusual in that it begins with a notice of his age in verse 1. Such a notice is typical for the Judean monarchs who ruled following the demise of the northern kingdom of Israel. See in 21:1, 22:1, 23:31, etc. The appearance of such a notice at this point is explained by Jehoash's young age at his accession to the throne. It highlights the parallel between the 7-year-old King Jehoash and the 8-year-old King Josiah. Both came to the throne at a very young age following the assassinations of their fathers. Both were considered righteous, particularly on account of their respective handling of affairs pertaining to the temple, and both were killed early in life after suffering foreign invasion.
It's interesting. It almost is the same story. You get this, with the kids squirreled away, and you could almost say it was the same story repeated. Just, one he's 7 and one he's 8. Even the names are very similar.
Okay, so for this reading, when I say verse 1, which is 2, I mean 1 in the Old Testament, which is 2 in the Masoretic text. So I'll start on verse 1, which is 2. Tzipia from Beersheba. We have no other information regarding her. Fritz notes that Sivia translates as gazelle and, quote, shows the loving attention of the parents who named their child after the intelligent and nimble animal of the steppe, end quote. Commentators note that the significance of her origin from Beersheba. Cogan writes that this indicates Ahaz's wish to tighten his connections with the influentials in the desert periphery on southern Judea. Likewise, Sweeney writes that such a marriage indicates an attempt to consolidate Davidic rule over Judah, and would have been particularly important during the early 8th century BCE to protect Judean interests in the Negev region, following the loss of Edom and the assassination of Ahaziah. Thus, quote, Judah would be perceived as weak during this period, and Jehoash would need to establish control over the land by allying with local chieftains, end quote. On verse 2, which is 3, this positive note by DH is repeated in 14:3 regarding Amaziah, who is also described as a righteous king, though he did not reach the same level as his father did. According to 2 Chronicles 24:15-22, Jehoash remained loyal to Yahweh as long as Jehoiada was alive, and the chieftains of Judah turned him away from the right path. On 3, which is 4, Hens-Piazza comments, despite the watchful eye of a temple priest, the people are sacrificing and making offerings on the high places. This draws connections backward and forward in the narrative of Kings, raising a question mark about the positive assessment of Jehoash. On the one hand, the notation anticipates the upcoming reign of Josiah, who will centralize cult and worship in Jerusalem, 2 Kings 22:3-7, and put an end to local shrines. On the other hand, the reference echoes the earlier account of Solomon when the people were still frequenting the high places, as did the king himself in 1 Kings 3:1-3. Across these traditions, each king's actual influence upon worship appears very limited. Even now, with a refurbishing of the temple, the people still offer at the local shrines. That kings would serve to mediate God to the people remains a dimming hope for the future. On verses 4-16, which is 5-17, regarding sources behind these verses, McKenzie comments, the question of sources resurfaces with the anecdote in verses 5-17. Theories about the nature of the source behind this anecdote have varied widely. Wellhausen's postulation of a temple history from which the account was drawn continues to influence scholars who regard it as a priestly composition, albeit pre-DH in origin. The priestly terminology, though, and the practice of fundraising for the temple that is depicted here have led others to regard this anecdote as an etiology for Second Temple cultic practice, and thus a post-DH addition, according to Wuthwein and Fritz. Such views focus too narrowly on language. There are, to be sure, several terms that reflect acquaintance with the vocabulary of priests, but the perspective on priests as a whole in this passage is negative. They are not only inefficient and apathetic about maintaining the temple's physical plant. The narrative falls just short of accusing them of outright theft in verse 17. The point of the system set up in verses 11-17 is to prevent them from keeping the money that is donated. This negative outlook would seem to preclude priestly authorship. In addition, not all of the priestly quote-unquote terminology is necessarily late, and the items that are may be glosses. What these terms indicate, therefore, is the author's familiarity with some of the professional language of the priesthood.
I mean, it's possible a later author could have also been disgusted by the fiscal mismanagement and greed of priests. It's not like that's a new phenomenon.
Okay. On 4 and 5, which is 5 and 6, Hens-Piazza comments, Joash, who was hidden and raised in the temple as a youngster, makes its renovation the heart of his royal career. The narrative report on this project is structured and subdivided by the commands of this king. First, Jehoash issues a twofold order instructing the priests to collect money and with it finance repairs on the house of the Lord. Hence, they are to be the recipients of donations and offerings, as well as the financiers of this large-scale operation. We can surmise from Jehoash's order that the Temple of Solomon has fallen into disrepair over the years. His directives to the priests also distinguish between the money collected from two different sources: assessments of individuals and voluntary offerings. The money assessed each person suggests some collection procedure similar to the one narrated in Leviticus 27, 1-8. There, a person's religious contribution in silver was determined with respect to their age and gender. In addition, Jehoash expected voluntary offerings from any individuals and in any amount. Exactly when Jehoash gave this order to the priests is not stated. On verse 6, which is 7, by the 23rd year of King Joash. This is one of the few notes in the Book of Kings which lists a date to the described action. Compare 1 Kings 14:25. Cogan suggested that the origin of this dating is from a listing done in the palace or the temple. Likewise, McKenzie suggested that this note might indicate an official source behind this account, or more likely, behind that of Hazael's incursion in verses 18-19, which occurred at about the same time. On that same verse, the priests still had not repaired the temple. No reason is given as to why the priests did not repair the temple. Kimchi suggested that the priests had accumulated a vast amount of money for themselves, and afterwards they would repair the temple. Sweeney writes that the long period of Judah's subjugation to Israel would have drained income from the temple and disrupted any normal repair mechanism that might have been in place. McKenzie suggested that it was either due to inertia or lack of central oversight due to Jehoiada's weakness in dotage, or there were deeper disagreements about the authority over temple matters or the source of financing its upkeep.
Well, if it's not centralized, if each individual priest can just take donations and then they're supposed to, fix things, they could be like, what do you call it? People, the effect of where you think other people will take care of it. It's not my problem.
But it was specifically said, you'll keep these kinds of offerings and these kinds of offerings will go to the temple repair, because there are specific required offerings for various things. This is for a sin, this is for a vow, this is for a taxation that everybody pays, this is for a whatever. And he didn't leave them with no income whatsoever. But it is the job of the priests to take care of the temple. And it's important to note, like, it's a bit like, oh God, who's that horrible man with the plastic teeth? Osteen, Joel Osteen. Like, he lives in a $4 million mansion or something as his parish house. You're looking at every pastor, and I've known many pastors who were good men who took, a salary from what was given to the church, and they were doing a full-time job. Fair enough. Take a salary. That's just and right. But, it shouldn't just all go into your pockets. It has to go to the entire
you still need
thing.
somebody. You still need somebody to take charge and be like, okay, you guys use your money, fix this section. You guys fix this section. Like, it seems that if every individual was collecting money for repairs, but they didn't know when or how to do it, then
I love her summary. That horrible man with the plastic teeth.
He
Yeah, it
just
doesn't really
he looks
narrow it down.
plastic. He and his wife both look plastic, and he has giant horse teeth. It's like a very, very creepy, like if Barbie and Ken were way creepier.
Okay.
Okay, on that same verse, the priest still, no, sorry, I read that. On verse 9, which is 10, beside the altar on the one side. The mention of the altar, Hamizbeach, is strange, given that there was no altar immediately inside a doorway in the Solomonic plan of the temple, according to Hens-Piazza. McKenzie suggested that the altar was probably a threshold altar, rather than the main temple altar, which stood in the middle of the court. He notes Stade's opinion that the reading Hamizbeach could not be correct, since the altar stood in the middle of the court, rather than near its entrance. He instead proposed reading Hamatzeva, the pillar instead, pointing out transliterations of some Greek witnesses, like Amazepe, I think, Amazepi, and Amazibi. McKenzie, however, writes that this evidence is not strong, quote-unquote, since Greek zeta typically corresponds to the Hebrew zayin rather than the tzadik. And Sweeney comments, quote, the confusion is rooted in the uncertainties of the placement of the altar before the temple. Although the altar stands before the temple, its exact location is not stated in the accounts of Solomon's construction of the temple and its furnishings in 1 Kings 6 through 8. Compare Exodus 27, 1 through 8, and 38, 1 through 7. 2 Kings 16, 10 through 16 indicates that King Achaz of Judah removed the bronze altar from before Yahweh, before the house, and the place between the altar and the house of Yahweh, in verse 14, to make way for a new altar based on the design of the one he saw in Damascus when he was summoned before the Assyrian monarch Tiglath-Pileser III. Because the bronze altar was placed to the north of the altar, quote-unquote, that is, the new altar built to the pattern observed in Damascus, the altar must have stood directly before the entrance to the temple. This explains the wording of the text, with the chest for the deposit of funds to the right of the altar. One would have to pass by the side of the altar when approaching the temple. Since one approaches the temple from the east, the right would be the north side of the altar, where Achab later placed the bronze altar.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, Rashi, for example, just understands like by the altar as the courtyard where the altar is on the right by the door.
Mm-hmm.
So when you come in on the right, it's not right next to the actual altar; it's in the same courtyard as it, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But on the right doesn't mean to the right of the altar, but to the right of the entrance, sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay, so on verse 10, which is 11, the high priest. Several commentators like Stade and Fritz take the reference to the high priest, HaKohen HaGadol, to be a late addition, since this title was only instituted in the Second Temple period. Moreover, the presence of the singular verb vaya'al, to go up, and the fact that the priest lives in the temple and would not go up to it, suggests that the title is late. While McKenzie writes that the last two considerations are not strong, he writes that the title HaKohen HaGadol is post-exilic, and in this passage it is probably a scribal modification.
It's interesting to think about that, about how many, because, we look at the text to try and figure out when it was written, but it was also preserved through several editings in which they may have adapted the terminology or something like that, but it's still, it's so many layers. It's so interesting.
Yeah, maybe they didn't like the idea of the king's treasurer would come up and take the money. They figured it should be the priest should be involved in it somehow, so they added "and the high priest" into that into that sentence. So, and the fact that it says high priest indicates that that's like quite a late addition.
Okay, on verse 12 through 16, which is 13 through 17, Fritz comments, the detailed exploration of buildings works at the temple during the reign of Joash is somewhat puzzling, because the main theme appears to be the redistribution of funds from offerings, rather than the action or behavior of the king. The description also bears out conditions in the temple that are credible only for the period after the end of the kingship. It is thus best to interpret these expositions as an argument that legitimizes the situation prevailing during the Second Temple by connecting it back to the royal decrees during the First Temple. Throughout the monarchy, it was part of the responsibilities of the king to provide for the maintenance of the temple. Joash's behavior is thus not likely to be historically accurate. Only during the Second Temple and with the end of kingship as an institution did the priests have to find solutions for the upkeep of the temple. Received contemporary practice of the post-exilic period is thus explained by relating it back to the orders of the king and events of the past. Such justification is of the legal status of those involved was appropriate, seeing that provision of means for the upkeep of the temple out of the cultic donations meant certain financial losses for the priesthood.
Yeah, but why the character assassination of Joash though? Seems like if the story was made up like Second Temple period to say, oh, you see, the king said that this is what we should do, blah blah blah. Well, I guess it's not really character assassination of him; it's more anti-priestly. Which,
yeah,
I guess if it was written, maybe they were having problems with priests not looking after the building during the second period, and then this story was like, see, this is what happens when priests don't look after the building themselves. The king has to step in and make a centralized thing. So we're gonna say now as well, based on this past event, that this is what you should be doing as well. Don't take these donations put in a box, and then you guys need to make sure that what's in the box is used for repairs.
Mm-hmm. On 17, which is 18, Gath. The element Gath appears in the names of other settlements, such as Gath of 1 Kings 2:39, Gath Hefer in 2 Kings 14:25, Gath Rimon in Joshua 21:24, and Gittaim in 2 Samuel 4:3. Archaeologists generally identify the Gath of this verse as Tel Es Safi or Tel Safit, located in the western Shephelah. Fritz writes that the capture of Gath indicates a clear strategy. Quote, Hazael pushes south across the coastal plain in order to turn from there toward Judah and Jerusalem. The strategy resembles that of Sennacherib's invasion of Judah in 1813-15.
Kind of hilarious. Stealing your strategies.
Or just, the story didn't necessarily happen that way, but they copied what happened later.
Of course. I mean, if you have to fill in the blanks and you don't have the documentation, taking at least a plausible battle plan from something that was known to have happened is maybe the best guess you can make. Who knows?
Okay, on verse 18, which is 19, Hens-Piazza comments, in a highly ironic shift, Jehoash's determination to restore the temple will now be supplanted by his determination to preserve Jerusalem against the threat of invasion. To placate the approaching enemy and offset Hazael's attack, Jehoash ransacks the very temple he has worked to repair. The votive gifts of his royal ancestors, Yehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, are stripped from the Lord's house to buy Jerusalem's security. Joash raids the treasures of the house of the Lord to pay tribute to a different Lord.
Yeah, or maybe being brought up in the temple made him have this like close connection to it, and he felt I am a product of this place. It's almost like like my maiden home. Mm-hmm. So when if I need money, then I should be able to go into the temple because I'm a product of it as well.
Well, and the temple would have been burned and ransacked too if the armies had invaded and taken everything. Right, so it's not like they would have been spared. But also, if he grew up there as a kid, no matter how much they watched him, eventually he would have found every nook and cranny. So he knew what was in there.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. On verse 20, which is 21, according to 2 Chronicles 24:25, Joash was killed in his bed. Josephus in Antiquities 9:171 wrote that when Joash fell victim to a serious disease, he was killed by his friend who avenged the death of Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada. Kimchi, however, wrote that he was injured during a battle, and they carried him in bed to Jerusalem, and on their way his servants killed him on his bed. Cogan writes that the name of the place of assassination, Bet Milo, indicates that the king was at Jerusalem during the act. He writes that Bet Milo was probably a well-known building in Milo, the royal quarter at David's city, but the location of Sila, which is a hapax, in Jerusalem is unknown. Sweeney suggests that Sila was the name for one of the roadways leading from Milo to outside of the city. McKenzie takes Sila to be a corruption of Milo, resulting from the miswriting of Samech for Mem, such that Bet Milo and Hayoret Sila are variants.
So his servants killed him.
Mhm.
They're not very good servants, are they?
No.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point of a conspiracy, Aaron. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, sorry.
Normally like a royal coup or something like this. I mean, we see it's not successful. He's killed, but then his son becomes king right after him.
Yeah.
Oh my
We
gosh.
don't see what happens to them.
Do you think George R.R. Martin was inspired by the Bible?
Oh,
I mean, this many
course.
coups and this much incest and blood for the blood god. It's giving very Bible. Just
well, I mean, I think a lot of
graphics.
it is inspired by British history, the War of the Roses in particular.
What we don't get with the Bible are those rewarding moments of vengeance, like where Bolton gets eaten by his own dogs, or when Littlefinger finally catches it across the throat.
Those were delightful. And Joffrey's death was really quite satisfying.
Yeah,
The poor
we
actor.
don't really get to hate this character before they're offed. In the Bible, it's not very good at like character development.
Are you done with your commentary, Tomer?
No. I have one final comment, 21, which is 22. According to 2 Chronicles 24:26, Zabad, i.e. Jozakar, son of Shimat, was an Ammonite, and Jehozabad, son of Shimrit, was Moabite. Rashi, based on a midrash, unknown, writes, quote, "Why did Scripture specify? To teach us that the Holy One, blessed is He, requited him through people with traits similar to his. Let the ungrateful Ammonites and Moabites, who ignored our father Abraham's favor, which he did for Lot, that he fought with the kings to rescue him, yet they hired Bilaam to curse his descendants, and he will requite Joash, who ignored the favor of Jehoiada, and killed Zechariah his son, as it is explained in Scripture in 2 Chronicles 24:22." End quote. Cogan, however, takes this specification as indicating the post-exilic author's detest of Ammon and Moab. McKenzie suggested that the assassin may have been an individual, since Jozakar and Jehozabad are similar and probably variants. Nevertheless, Fritz comments, quote, "The concluding formula deviates from the usual pattern in that it places the murder of Joash in the 14th year of his reign. The violent removal of a ruler at such a late stage is surprising, yet no further information is offered other than the names of the assassins. Whether they derive from a tradition or are sheer invention can no longer be determined. They are characterized as servants and thus belong to the small circle of courtiers, but nothing is said about their specific function. It therefore remains unclear whether the murder is an act of personal revenge or a planned insurrection. The smooth succession to the throne makes personal motives appear to be the more likely cause."
It is kind of funny. The servant of the king could mean anyone from the high chamberlain to the boy who cleans the chamber pot. It's not specific.
Yeah. I'm done.
Okay.
You don't have any Christians?
No, there are no like interesting Christians that I could find. I mean, there is most of the commentaries from Ishodad and Ephraim, but it's not that interesting.
Okay. Well, thank you anyway. SJL, who for whatever reason felt that they needed to put in the pronunciation after that. The name is ESSJAYEL. SJELL, we can figure out that it's supposed to be spelling out the initials SJL. But I grew up Catholic. We never covered much of the Bible. I could never stick with it without you guys. Not sure whether to thank you or blame you.
Both, probably both.
Yeah. Both.
I like
in,
that.
In fairness, I feel our punishment is included in the crime. It's somewhat axiomatic.
Trevor and Wright says the temple as a place for the offerings and rituals. So, in what way does repairing the temple and the loss of it had on the mind? Am I reading that right? The temple as a place for the offerings and rituals, or I guess that's supposed to be is. So, in what way does repairing the temple and the loss of it had on the minds of the Canaanite people?
I mean,
this for the first part where they destroy the temple, that would have been just one place. Like there are other temples of like Baal, but then for this chapel, the chapter, the repair of the of this temple would be for, I mean, in the minds of the Deuteronomistic historian, at least, I mean, he wouldn't have really cared about, what the Canaanites thought.
Yeah, also the Canaanites wouldn't have really been an identity at this point. Like the Israelites and the Judahites would have been pretty much. I don't know if the Moabites and Ammonites are Canaanite as well, but they would have been pretty much all that was left.
I mean, yeah, Canaanite is like a pretty rough designation, and it's like, yeah, it's only like later do we see that as a designation. It's not like a specific group or anything. Since multiple groups, yeah.
But yeah, they're not mentioned by name after some point, and I think archaeology, it seems to be like, before the Bronze Age collapse, you would have had Canaanite people, and then afterwards it would have been this other people with, I mean, I think the Phoenicians called themselves Kanani or something similar, and I think even the Carthaginians used the word as well to refer to themselves, but they wouldn't have been the Canaanites. It would have been a subset.
Well,
right?
Yeah, but they don't seem to be too terribly accurate when they're using just, declaring God's vengeance on people. If you want to say that this or that local group is descendant of the original Canaanites and thus deserves our wrath, so we get to kill them all and take their shit.
Right. In the story, the Israelites are foreigners that invaded, and the Canaanites were these locals. But in
reality,
is that they are Canaanites, and then it's not like the people who are worshiping Baal in the story were Canaanites, and when then they were killed off. These were Israelites that had kept their Canaanite culture with them, or at least religious culture, while becoming Israelites over time.
It's a narrative meant to impose an external, aggressive narrative over what is, in fact, blood feuds of kin that have been going on for way too freaking long. So that's always nice.
Tammy B offers for $1.49 Australian a rainbow super sticker. And then Dara O'Kane says, if God is everywhere, why is his power and presence stronger in a temple than anywhere else? Better reception.
And you know what's really, really funny about that? There are texts like the Apocalypse of Abraham that suggests that you can't really pray when it's cloudy because God won't hear you. Like I'm serious. This pops up in multiple apocryphal works where you can't, where like the clouds do affect the reception.
Phenomenal cosmic power. What was that? I'm sorry, there was a cloud. I couldn't hear you.
Right, yeah.
So I'm gonna guess that we're not gonna jump over to chapter 13 today.
No, we are not.
A good time.
I gotta do some insurance stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as always, I have plenty to dive into as well. Thank you, everyone who participated. Thank you, everyone for viewing. Anybody have any closing comments?
Yeah, absolutely.
Discord.
Join the Discord. Subscribe to
Yes.
Melakhim Atheist, because if you haven't, you're a bozo, and you don't want to be a bozo, do you, bozo?
And if you subscribe and come to the Discord, I'm sure that Lawrence will come and personally.
He will
you a
come
kiss.
in personally.
I will
Yes,
come.
he will. Yes, yes.
I'll come all over that Discord, every single
Exactly.
channel.
Oh
Yes.
my god.
That explains why it's sticky. Okay.
Mm.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye.